Morning guys, and welcome to Soundcraft Basic Training. We are broadcasting from Cape Audio College, as you can see behind me. We've got some students in the room. Just maybe a little bit about today's training. So today, obviously, we're looking at basic features of the Soundcraft Vi systems. We're going to do a quick just history of Soundcraft and a bit of an overview of the hardware. And then the mission today is to try and get you to a place where if you're in front of one of these systems, that you'll be able to set it up, know how the hardware works, and get going as quick as possible. Tomorrow, obviously, we're following on to this. We're looking into more advanced features, so it'll be beneficial to you, obviously, to have some kind of digital mixing experience, or also to have some experience on the VI consoles will also be beneficial. But obviously you can always come back to this video and come and watch it. So we're just going to start with a little bit of history on Soundcraft. Soundcraft's been around since 1973, so it's been a while. And obviously starting with digital consoles. I always feel like digital consoles that do have a history in analog, I always feel sonically they are somehow a little bit better. I don't know if it's just me and I'm biased, but that's one of the things that we are really proud about when it comes to Soundcraft. The analog consoles are also really good. I don't know if you've ever guys have mixed or seen maybe a MH3 or the big analog Soundcraft consoles. They are really good at what they do. Obviously well known for their EQs and also for their head amps, which is kind of the legacy that we've built on the VI systems. So first things first, we're gonna just spend a little bit of time on looking at the hardware. So today's training topics is hardware options. The VI range is split into two families. We've got the VI 1000, 2000, 3000, which is kind of the bottom tier. And then it goes to the bigger systems. I'm going to explain it just now. This is the second generation. So the 1000 range is kind of version 2, if I can call it that. There was a predecessor to this, and they were called VI1s and VI4s and VI6s. Operation-wise, they are very similar, but the DSP engine in the second generation consoles are actually adopted from Studer. It's a spider core, so it's a lot more powerful. So there's some of the features that are not available on the older consoles. Even if you have done your firmware update, you're not going to be able to see them. Console layout, we're going to have a look at that. Photonics is basically what these consoles are built on. We're going to look at photonics, basic show file. Obviously, that's important. If you've never worked on a console, you can't mix a show if you don't know a show file and know how to make a snapshot. We're going to do patching, gang features, very important. It's something that is kind of intertwined in the features of the console everywhere. But we need to talk about it today because if you don't know how to gang channels together or group channels together, you're also going to struggle to do a quick setup. And you're going to be sitting there for hours doing menial tasks. Then we're going to do basic copy and paste, which is obviously important. Just a mute group and a VCA. Isolation. ISO stands for isolation. So it's basically their way of doing a recall safe on a console. And then we're doing aux groups and matrices. And then obviously, for the guys in the room, we're going to do some practical after lunch, which is not going to be live, unfortunately. And those are some of the topics that I want to talk about, but obviously you guys can say, ask your questions. Just a little bit about me. I've put some photos of shows that I've worked on over the years. I studied at Cape Audio College, 2002. So it's a full circle for me. It's 19 years. 19 years we said this morning. So yeah, this was home for me. And then, as most engineers thought, I'm going to go into the life science, into the studio industry, which I did for a few years, and then eventually made a transition. I did quite a few years in corporate, and then ended up being a monitor engineer, where I've spent the last 6 or 7 years basically only mixing monitors. One of my other passions is recording. I see myself as a recording engineer, not so much post, but I love trying to go to a show and record it and get stems down that sounds like we have recorded in the studio, which sounds simple, but it's actually it's an interesting process. I mean, the way we do it and the gear makes it really easy, but to do it really well is actually quite an art. And getting nice clean signals when you've got a stage that's blaring and there's a whole production going on and you're working with a lot of other crew. That's one of the photos where I'm looking up. Is actually where I recorded a live DVD. On the left there is me at Hdmi Port mixing, and the flames there is an Afrikaans show called Afrikaans is Groot. So I do a lot of work for that client. And just a few other shows. One of my other passions is actually coming up with a concept for a show as well. So, and I think today, if I kind of go a little bit off topic, I love talking about these things because when you're studying, you don't know where you're going to go. You're getting all this knowledge, and you don't know exactly where you'll end up, you know. And audio is so much bigger than just mixing front of us, or mixing monitors, or sitting in a studio building ads. That's like, we tend, when we study, to look at that and think, oh my word, if I don't get a job in one of these areas, I won't be successful. That's not true. There's basically audio and everything. I mean, I've got friends doing, evac systems in malls, and it might sound like something that you don't want to do, but if you see how complex the systems is and actually how challenging it is to build this type of systems, it's incredibly interesting. I've also been involved with Studer, commissioning systems into broadcast spaces. Fascinating. All of a sudden you're working with thousands of channels. Literally you'll have 1,000 coming in, or even a small setup will have 400 coming in, 300 going out, and there's embedders. And just understanding those systems and being able to do that is a completely different skill. So what I want to say is you need to be open-minded, I guess, when you go into the industry, especially where we are at the moment. Things are changing, as you guys know. So that's one of the shows in the middle, the one that says Benjamin Dube. That's one of the shows I've actually drawn and designed, and I put all the technical together for that. It's for one of my gospel clients. Something else, I threw this in here because I guess just to spark a little bit of interest. This is a topic that I can talk about forever, is how you integrate different pieces of hardware. It's becoming simpler because the gear in between is becoming more powerful, and I've been fortunate to do the control system design for the show called Afrikaans is Groot. That was actually how I got involved with them before I started mixing monitors for the show. And this was quite an old design. It looks a lot different now, but it just shows you how different consoles can actually work together to create this ecosystem. We've got large channel counts. We normally run about 128 channels on these shows, because that's the limit on the VI 7000 consoles. And sometimes even at the top there in front of us, you see we actually need to split the signal over more than one console to have the faders available and actually to make up the channel count. So it gets quite interesting. And you can do it. I mean, you can marry, you'll see there's 3 different brands on here. There's some watch-out servers there at the top, and some lighting consoles. And all of this is running on a timeline. When you push spacebar in Pro Tools, everything that's programmed basically plays out. show like this, you can't mix live. It's basically just impossible. It's just too much going on, and there's too many channels. You can't have enough of the channels in front of you to actually build a consistent mix that's going to be the same over 11 shows. So if any of you are interested in this, I also always enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. Right, so let's quickly go to the beginning. So today we've got a VI 1000 in front of us, and the reason why I can train you on this is because essentially how they work are all the same. You'll see on screen they all have 96 inputs. They've got 24 stereo buses. That's mono or stereo. They've got 2 option cards at the back, and they come standard with a local Midi and Dante. That specific port doesn't have control on, so you can't connect a stage rack to it, but that's obviously to integrate your recordings and your plugins, which kind of becomes a norm these days, right? Everyone uses their plugins and want to do some type of virtual sound check. So that's standard. And it kind of, the console fits into live venues. The reason why there's this baby here is a lot of theaters in Europe run them, and they've got tiny little theaters, like 200 seaters, and the front of ours is basically the size of a table. So you need to fit lighting, AV, and audio in there, but you need to be able to take high channel counts, you know, when the production is difficult. The advantage, obviously, you've got time to program, so you can build snapshots for everything and only have in front of you what you need. The console allows you to actually build custom layers that are also snapshot recallable. So even though the surface is small, you can still do the job. At this point, there's actually something I want to say, and you'll see actually this console, even though it is the same than its brother, the 3000 and 2000, most of the VI consoles are actually quite big for their channel counts. And it kind of goes with the methodology of Soundcraft is we want to not have the user go through too many menus and stuff, especially when we're mixing. So the only menus that are really on the console, and we'll talk about this later when we go to the live top view, the only menus are really as during setup. Once you're mixing, we try and keep the user on the console, which I'll talk about the Vestonics in just a moment. So that's basically just 3 different frame sizes. The VI 1000 is slightly different in the sense that it's got more layers to get to all the inputs, and because of that, the way you access your outputs is slightly different. But except for that, it's basically a carbon copy. This is the back plane of the VI 3000. So the VI 1000 is basically just at the back chopped in half. It's got the inputs and output cards at the back. The 3000's obviously got place for 4 of them. You can swap them out as you please, except the one at the bottom left. You can't really see on that picture, but that needs to be in there because that's your monitor outs, and also your main outs are also are pre-assigned to your basic show start file. Once again, to get you going quite quickly, you can obviously repatch it and change it as you please, but that's kind of how it is. So we've got some MIDI in and outs and some USBs. That's if you want to put a keyboard or some flash drives in there. There's a Hdmi port for connectivity that allows you to bring metadata into the console, for instance from a receiver, or if you want to connect your computer to it like I've done. Some AES ins and outs. And then this section here is what makes this console interesting. This is Dante and Midi that comes standard with the console. So it's which makes this console really good for like a broadcast scenario, or for instance a church that already has a front of house console and they just want to do a separate mix. You don't have to buy any cards, you can just put it in The console also allows you to do the gain tracking to these ports, which is quite a nice feature. Clocking in and out. Do you guys in the room know what clocking is? Is everyone cool with clocking? Studio engineers, they're cool with clocking. Clocking allows you to sync things together in the digital domain. Okay, very important. And then we've got these two option cards. All three of these consoles have two of them, and there's a whole range. There's 16 different cards that you can slot in there. This is one of the features that we love about the consoles, is the fact that if you need to integrate into a different system, you don't have to change the console. You can pull the card and put it in there, rent the card in. If you need more Dante, for instance, or whatever the case might be, or you need more AS3 ins and outs, or more analog ins and outs, and you're running out, instead of now having to put a bigger console in, you can pull the card, buy the card. It's way more cost effective than upgrading to a bigger console. And then we've got two power supplies, a main and a redundant. You'll see on here at the moment my power button is red. The reason for that is that I only have one of them plugged in, and that's normally how I run my system. If I only have access to hot power, I'll only run one. If I've got a UPS, I'll put the one side on hot power and the other side on UPS. Reason being, if we get a spike or the generator does a backflip and we blow both power supplies at once, then we're in serious trouble. They will switch instantaneously, so they're hot swappable. You can pull the one out and put the other one in. I will always advise that you do hot power on the one side and UPS on the other side. Two reasons. Obviously, as I've just explained, it protects your system against spikes. And then secondly, if you're in a situation where you've set it up correctly like this, and your stage box and your console, both one sides are on UPS, when the power goes down, it actually allows you to focus on the power issue and not the consoles. So you're taking one or two things out of the equation, because otherwise you're going to go run. If you're in a club, you need to run, switch the PA off, get the console on, get the stage track on, run back to stage, get the PA on. That's going to waste a huge amount of time. Instead of just walking backstage, put the breakers on and wait for the PA to get back. At least the console and the rack stays on. My 5 cents there. Use it and use it. There is a HDMI port here that allows you to duplicate one of the screens, but it's never really been developed any further. So it would have been nifty if you could choose which screen it is, but it's not. So the main screen normally comes onto that port. I guess there is one or two ways around it, but let me not encourage anyone to do that. Here's just a closer look at the ins and outs. I took these photos of the VI 1000 actually. There you can see your Midi port there, and your Dante there. Those are the AES3 ins and outs. Midi in and out for triggering. We're going to look at that tomorrow. That's actually quite a cool way of linking consoles together, triggering snapshots, for instance. And these are clocking ports. Yeah, and that's basically it. And you'll see these the slot cards. For the guys in the room, you can come and have a look at the back a little bit later. I thought I'll just take a photo of this. So that card at the bottom there, I'll just mention it. That's the one card that always needs to stay in the console. You can't take that card out. The other ones you can swap around as you please if you want to have more or less of them. You need to have them in. You'll see they're actually labeled. The monitor A, monitor B is labeled, and also left and right is labeled to get you going quickly. It's when you recall a start show, in that config file, these outputs are already programmed. So obviously if you pull the card out, you're always going to get an error on the console. It'll work, but not great. Okay, so this is the bigger brother of the three consoles we just spoke about. So it's, as you can see, it's got more ins. It's got 128 ins, got 32 stereo buses. Big difference, it's got a local rack. And the significance there is now you've got a lot more option cards. You've got 5 option cards. It also comes with a blue link breakout. So it's this part here. So this allows you to actually now, for instance, in a broadcast or a scenario, or for instance in a church that's got a server room, to have your brain sitting in the server and have these inputs and outputs sitting in front of a house, and still have a stage rack and all your connectivity you need on stage or playback, everything as you please. This becomes important in a broadcast scenario because in a broadcast there will always be a system engineer and obviously the operators, and they're two completely different people. So most of the time the operators won't even know. If something goes wrong with the system, they've got no idea how to fix it. They only operate on a very low level. They basically just make sure that the audio that's coming in is going out fine. Very often they don't have hardware experience, so when something goes wrong, it will actually be the system engineer's job to go into the server room and go and have a look what's going on there. This obviously allows you to integrate into systems quite easily, because now you can have this connectivity where you need it. You don't have to have it with the console. Now the advantage as well, obviously in a broadcast scenario or even an OB, the air, if it's a console that's going to be on all the time, the fans are pushing air over the boards the whole time, and you don't want to be pushing dirty air over your boards. So if you have a proper server room where the air is clean and there's no dust, and someone has thought about how the airflow works in that room, you'll be able to have the rack on all the time and not have to worry about it overheating or any of that stuff. So main difference is this is basically just a control surface. We don't call it a console anymore. It controls this box here, which is essentially the brain, and also the ins and outs. So the one half is your DSP at the top, and the bottom is basically all your option cards that you can slot in there. It comes standard with this blue link card, which is a Harman protocol. It's one of the ones we use to solve problems where we've got high channel counts and they need to be transferred between two different destinations at low latency. So this comes standard in those bigger systems, the VI 5000 and 7000 systems. Obviously now you can populate any of these. On the left hand side here are the ones you'll probably come across most often, and it's the Midi fiber, and there's a Midi Cat 5. The Cat 5 is aimed more at installations where we're going to plug it in and leave it like a church. There's also a little bit more options when it comes to the Cat 5 stage boxes, allowing for some cheaper or more cost-effective integration. And obviously Dante is something we use all the time these days. But these are the other options. We've got line in, line out, we've got mic cards, AES, EVU, 3G cards, important for broadcast because we can embed and de-embed onto the card. If you want to maybe send signal to a video router or receive a signal from a video router, Dolby E, ADAT, TDIF, ANET, GPIO, RockNet, CobraNet, and EtherSound, obviously for PA integration. I want to just stop for a second and talk about these two cards, because for some reason the cards confuses everyone. They're not very confusing. These are the cards we kind of use all the time. So these are the cards we'll have in our option slots to connect to a stage rack. When they come from the factory, they are set up with 64 in and 64 out, and the control is on. So it will use a cable like this So this is not a nice shielded cable, but this is probably the most common one you'll come across. It's just a normal SC fiber, and it's got a send and receive. And basically what happens is you've got 64 channels going on the one and 64 channels on the other one. But another thing that also happens on this cable is control on here, which allows you to obviously change the gain settings on the stage rack or to switch the phantoms on and off. And this is an important thing to understand when it comes to Midi especially, is that the Midi part, the AES10 part, is the same for any console. I mean, that's why you can use a Midi router and convert it to whatever you please. But the control part is different. So some manufacturers will use some of the bandwidth and have less channels, have 56 channels instead of 64, and use the bandwidth of 8 channels to always have a direct connection with their stage rack. The advantage of that is regardless of what is saved on the show file, you can just take the stage rack, plug it in, and the console will know what it is, and will be able to continue working, no problem. What Soundcraft decided to do is to use a protocol where the first time you introduce the stage rack, it will prompt it concerning what it is. And then from there on, that data gets saved onto the console. So it's important to know that, because that's going to determine how you kind of set up your system. And when you make changes to the system, you want to be careful. Because if you had a show file where you ran a big stage rack with 64 in and 32 out, and you load the same show file but a different stage rack, you need to remember that you've made a system change now, and the console needs to be aware of it. Otherwise, you might see channels available on the console to patch that's not really there. The advantage obviously is that we don't lose any channels, which don't sound like a big deal. But when you get to shows where you use high channel counts, if you lose 8 channels on a stage rack, it's quite a lot. And the cost implication of now adding more stage racks in to get the system up. So 64 is quite a nice, 64 and 192 are nice frame sizes to have. And not losing those 8 channels and having to put in a third stage box to make up those channels is a really big advantage. So, coming back to the 2 Midi cards, on the left hand side there we've got the most common one, which is Midi fiber. You'll see it's got a main and an aux. That is to give you 2 connections to your stage tracks. If the one fails, it will switch over automatically. It also gives you the option of splitting the signal in 2. So there's a little button here, and this is, even if you don't remember everything I'm telling you about the card now, this is something just to remember that's quite important, is that on the stage track you've got the option of main, redundant, and aux. So if it's redundant, the console will choose between these 2 inputs, and if it loses the one, it will take the other one, and it will switch all these ins and outs over. If it's on main, it means all the control data is now pushed to the main port. So whatever console is connected to the main output there will have gain control, and also the output of that specific stage rack. So then if you obviously have a monitor console or a broadcast console that's just following it along, we'll then connect a fiber from here to any of the ports on the console, fiber ports on the console, and then all the inputs will be there. But you will not have any outputs, and this is the part that sometimes confuses people. That second port, if we're forcing the control to the main output, that second port is just a Midi feed. It's just a point-to-point feed. There's no control data on there. So when you do your patching on your console, we're going to go over this quite a bit today. If you go to input patch, oh, it's not a nice view of this now. So there's the input patching. Don't worry too much about this. We're going to spend a fair amount of time. When there's a stage rack connected, it looks like this. So there's the labeling of the rack. In this case, it's a 64N. If you take the Midi feed, so that aux out, for instance, and you connect it to a console, you should not see a stage rack. You should only see a Midi in, and that's where you're going to be doing your patching. It's important to understand this regardless of what system you work on. Most systems have this thing where the one console is taking control, and there's workarounds with it. I mean, there's gain tracking that comes into play and following the gains along. But essentially all that is doing, it's compensating, it's putting offset in. You have to understand, doesn't matter what system it is, how the system works. Because if you don't understand stuff like this, where the control data is and where it's not, it can often happen that you set up your show file and you're patching an actual input that's not actually really there, you know. You you switch off your console and switch it back on, you've lost all your patching because the console remembers a stage rack that's not really part of the show file anymore. So just good to know. So the console that's connected to the main output will always see the stage rack, and then the other one will just be a Midi stream. Just coming back to that previous slide, the local Midi and Dante comes up under local. So these two tabs always refer to option cards. This is not something that you need to understand 100% at this stage. But when it comes to Midi, especially on these systems, you can decide to switch the control off altogether. You can say, I've got a card here, and this card will never ever get connected to a stage rack. Never. It'll always be a playback, or it'll always be a recording, or I'm going to put my plugins on here, or my playback service will be coming in and out there. And I don't want to see all the channels because, say for instance, it's the playback system or the recording system can only do 32. If you're the system tech and you want to set it up nicely and to help the engineer, you maybe want to reduce the number of channels that's available on that card and only make it 32. So the card does allow you to do that. So you can pull the card out in the manual. There's little dip switches and you can change the dip switch. This is more in an install scenario. I'm mentioning it this now because maybe somewhere in your career you come across a card and you're plugging in a stage rack and it's telling you, sorry, I'm not going to connect. You know, it's showing a sync light, but you can't see the stage rack. Then maybe someone switched off the control. And it's those last two little dip switches. And the reason why I say, don't worry about it now, you can always call me when you run into this problem, and I'll explain to you how to do it. It's also in the manual. But it's just kind of in the back of your mind, it's good to know, right? And it's good to know when you build a big system, say for instance, you have an opportunity to install a system at a stadium or at a church, and they are doing recordings, ins and outs, and it's happening on an option card to be able to tailor the ins and outs of that card to their system, whatever that might be. There's a write-up on the Soundcraft website. So if you go to the website, soundcraft.com, and you go to the option cards, you'll see all the little pictures of the different cards. You scroll all the way to the bottom. There's this little PDF you can download. It's called Vi Series Midi Fundamentals. That's quite a nice thing to read because it explains exactly what I spoke about now, is how Midi works. And there's so many consoles that we're currently working on that uses Midi. So having a good understanding of the ins and outs of Midi is not the worst advantage in the world. So you can grab it there. Okay, stage tracks. So this is basically what our fiber or Cat5 will connect to. This gives us ins and outs at a certain location. So in a band scenario, you'll maybe have one of these at your radio racks to feed your in-ears and to grab the signals coming off your wireless microphones, and then maybe have another one on stage to patch your band. Sometimes you mix a festival, we've got more than one stage that are TikToking. You can put one on the one stage and one on the other stage, have everything patched in, and then record a snapshot to bring it up. The one on the left is called the VI stage track. It's the big boy. It's normally populated with 64 in and 32 out. You can obviously manipulate that to suit your needs. And then the compact stage track is where we have a need for ins and outs, but we don't want to put a big, expensive VI stage rack in a roof, for instance, to feed a PA. That doesn't make sense. You know, say you're in a big venue and the amplifiers are 300 meter run. By the time your analog mult gets out there, your signal's going to be destroyed. And your phasing is going to be completely messed up. So now you've got a problem. You need to get signal there. We often have this problem in stadiums to get signal to all the amps. So what you can do is you can take one of these smaller stage tracks, pull everything out, only put output cards in there and go put it by your amps or by your delay towers. And very often I would supply signal to multiple amplifiers in different locations by only using one of my outputs. And I'll just go into a Midi router like I did on that previous design, and I'll just split the signal up. I'll send 4 channels there and 4 there and 4 there, and I've only used one card, and I'm maybe giving a signal to like 8 different destinations. It's also very handy for comms. So as I said, the consoles do have the option of putting Cat5 cards in them. These smaller stage tracks are a lot cheaper, and they are actually available for the SI series. But there is a Cat5 card that will go into the VI consoles that will allow you to use any stage track with any of the VI consoles. So if you're someone who's already invested in a say a SI system, and you've got 2 or 3 of them, and you're adding a VI console, and you now want to be able to use those other stage tracks, one of those cards will actually not be the worst thing to have. And these are just 2 of the options. There are some other ones as well. Great. Okay, so now let's go here. Is there any questions at this stage in the room? All right. So as I said, the consoles essentially are all the same. The only difference that you could see on that photo is that we've got an input section here, an output section here. When you load your show file, that's basically how the console will start up. You'll have always inputs on the left, and always your buses or outputs on the right hand side or the middle here. Obviously on the 2000 you'll have another bay, input bay here. On the 3000 you'll have 2 input bays on the left and 1 on the right. On the 7000 you'll have an additional one. They all work exactly the same, and something from the get-go to understand about these consoles is there's a part of the console that we refer to as fixed. So you can't manipulate where the channel lands. You'll see it's also labeled there, and it's a little bit, I On the stream, probably you'll be able to see it a little bit better. But there's a little label there that says fix, and the input bays are A, B, C, D. And what's different on the 1000 is they've already populated on the user base. They've already populated inputs. This is different to the bigger systems. On a VI 3000 system, if you go to a user layer, it's just blank. So those are basically, once you've set up your show file, you go like, oh, I actually want to add 2 snares. Now you can reshuffle your channels on a user layer as you please. Or you're mixing a festival, like Ian would know, and now there's a guest engineer, but he only wants 4 lines or 5 lines, but now they're scattered all over the console. So you can now use a user layer to group them together and to manipulate them. So I just want to quickly talk about, obviously, when we work on a console, that's the first thing we want to know is how do we flip, right, between layers. So input layers are here, and output layers are at the top there. So there's our buses over here. There's a VCA that's also fixed, so it's VCA 1 to 18. And normally on most of the startup show files, the other VCAs, which is 9 to 16, will be on the last little tab there. Once again, all of these you can manipulate as you please. If you rather want input channels there, no problem. You can put an input channel there, assign it there. Just layout-wise, we've got our mute groups here. There's also a little tab here that lights up the buttons, view buttons concerning VCAs. I haven't set up any VCAs. We'll maybe look at that later. There's some buttons here. On the left-hand side, it says input gain, gate and threshold, and pan. It refers to the encoders. But once again, there's 2 user layers as well that you can make whatever you want. So you can say, on user 1, I want to always have bus 8 set. So now you'll see I'm manipulating bus 8. So it's just the additional encoder that's always at the top there that you can use for whatever you want. Most of the time we'll be using them to pull gains, right? Which makes sense, or to do pans. And those ones are already predefined for us. Pans make a lot of sense. And gains. Something interesting that I just want to mention now, and I often find that people get confused with when, and this is something new, issue we never had with analog consoles, is we always had a preamp connected to each channel. But that's not the case anymore, you know. So there's only a preamp connected to a specific processing channel once you've patched it, right? Once you've made a connection between the input, the physical input, and the channel. And what they've done here, which is quite cool, is when the console is patched to a gain, you'll see the little dial goes all the way to the bottom. But when you connect it to a digital in, I'm going to just say Midi, you'll see the little rotary marker is now in the middle, which is a nice indication that you've actually don't have a preamp or a head amp connected to that channel. Why? Because a trim can obviously go up and down, where a gain starts at the bottom and it goes up. It's nice, these little tricks. Also on the console as well at the bottom there, you'll see there's quite a lot of detail, and you guys can come and have a look at it later on. That gives you kind of status reports about where we are, what's happening on that specific channel. You can't see the detail here. We're going to go to the offline editor to look at that. So very important to know, this is what we call Vistonics. The top part of the screen is touch, and the bottom part of the screen always works with these rotaries. and with the little buttons next to it. So the idea with Vistonics was, it's a Harman patent, and it's kind of, for me, what actually sets these consoles apart from all the other digital consoles. There's one or two guys who are kind of on the same bandwagon now. When you work on an analog console, there's a very nice connection between the engineer and the hardware, because channel 1 is always channel 1, right? It's like you'll never go and try and EQ channel 1 on channel 5 or on a different place. But that's exactly what happens on all digital consoles. You've got a select button, and then the EQ is off to the side somewhere, and there's a screen. Some consoles are even like your hand will be in front of the screen when you have to EQ stuff, which is really odd, which is nice if you maybe left-handed, but if you're right-handed or the other way around. So Studer, who developed this with Harman, they're like, how do we bridge this problem where we've got a lot of channels and we need to work with layers and fit them in, but we need to find a way of kind of having that connection between what we're busy doing at the moment and the channel that we're working on. We don't want this disconnect where we go like, oh, we want to EQ, so we push select on the channel we want to EQ to, then push the EQ button and then start EQing, and the EQ is in a layout that's odd. Maybe at the bottom of the screen, or to the side of the screen. So this is their solution. You touch where you want to work. So at the top there, if I touch there, that's now input section. If I touch there, that's EQs, my dynamics, and those are my bus sends. So we have a closer look at this. If we touch this part here, it breaks open like that. So what's happening at the moment is you're never pushing two buttons to do one simple thing like EQing a channel, right? You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't need to go into menus to EQ stuff and go into menus to switch on compressors and stuff. Which, when you're mixing a band and it's only 24 channels, which often happens, right? A club, 24 channels, maybe sometimes a little bit more or less. It's not a big problem having to push buttons multiple times. But when you are running a big show of 128 channels and you're running 30 odd outs, having to push things more than once, and this is something, I know I'm going slightly off topic now, but this is something that you guys, it's kind of the evil of our time at the moment. We've got so much gear, and we've got such cool plugins, and we can connect to servers and do crazy processing. But what it's actually doing is it's distracting us from the purpose why we're there. We're there to get the signal into the console as clean as possible and to get it out with messing with it as little as possible, right? And not doing things that are unnecessary. So having a workflow where it's easy to get to things, I believe, allows you to actually work the audio more than the console. And if you've ever heard me talk, I always talk about this. You need to make sure that you're not fooling yourself. You're actually working the audio, and you're not busy fiddling with plugins and stuff. I see it time and time again, people tweaking plugins that are not even inserted, or EQing channels, and they're not even on the right channel. Or EQing a snare and half the PA's off. I mean, come on, what are we doing? Like, we need to be disciplined as sound engineers and honest with ourselves that when we work on hardware, we are really working the audio and not just playing around with the hardware. I did a recording 2 or 3 years ago, and when I was recording about 100 channels, and when I record, I push the faders up on my system so I can hear the audio coming in. And I could, the front of house engineer was sending me his mix, and he was on a really good console. He was actually on a VI, and he had a really nice server. And there was very little difference between what was coming in from front of house and my 100 channels where I've just pushed up the faders. And you need to, at that stage, kind of be honest with yourself. What are you really doing, you know? You're inserting these plugins and you're matching gains. And it's sounding slightly different because the plugin has got a hot output, or it's got a preset that makes the bass happen in a way. But you have to ask yourself if the change that was made wasn't just that. You know, wasn't it just a gain change, or wasn't it just a slight EQ change? And it's disturbing. I mean, you're sitting with a few million rands worth of gear, and as the people coming into the room, I asked them to A/B the two mixes, just the faders being up and the front of house mix, and a lot of guys couldn't even tell when the vocal wasn't going, couldn't tell which is which. And this happens to all of us, but I'm kind of, I guess in hindsight, I'm warning you about this to make sure that you are working the audio and not fooling yourself. That's why I like simplicity. I do like hardware that allows me to get to stuff quite quickly, and that's quite simple to work. I don't think consoles should be complicated. I think that's nonsense. A complicated console is not a good console. It's no use. It can patch, do crazy stuff, but it spends all your time and energy to do it. If it can't do it simply, I don't think it's a good feature to have. So let's just go back to, sorry, off topic, but maybe valuable to someone. So at the top we've got our input section. We've got two inputs, 1 and 2, so you can put a main instrument and a backup instrument, or I normally do on my vocals. If I've got 12 vocals, I'll have RX 1 to 12, and then I'll have my backup mic, which is say RX 16, and I'll patch it into the second input there, and you can toggle between the two. Also on the console, it allows you to use the function key to toggle between. You'll see the gain change there between those two inputs, which is quite cool. So if the vocal drops, your stage tech can just run, give the mic to the vocalist, you push the function button, and now all of a sudden that whole signal chain is uninterrupted. Once again, when you're mixing front of house, not a big deal, but if I'm sending that signal to 24 in-ears, it's a big deal. You don't just quickly fix. I mean, that's going to take me maybe 2 minutes to send that feed at the right level, and to send the mic to an effects unit and return the effects unit. That's a lot of work. So being able to just do that is extremely helpful, and it's just a few minutes of programming. Keep on doing that. So these are your two patch points while we're talking about patching. So if it's on in1, we're patching here. There's a little button that's on the screen. So obviously I just previously said this is a touch screen, and at the bottom here we're using the rotaries and the buttons. Push it there and you just decide what you want to patch. So we can say we want to patch mic 1. And the backup. I'm now messing up my kick. I shouldn't do this. The backup can be that channel there. Right, so now to flip between them, it's just pushing the phantom or there. Once again, you'll see when we go to input 2, all of a sudden the gain is gone, obviously because there's no head amp, right? But there's still a trim. When we do setup, very often we need to be able to send oscillator or pink noise to a channel. This is a really nice feature. It allows me to send pink to a channel. Let's quickly do that. Oscillators under the Talkback section. Don't worry about that now. We're going to talk about that after Vistonics. So the cool thing about the oscillator on the console is it doesn't unpatch your input 1 and 2. which is some consoles work like that, where it's fine. You can put an oscillator onto the channel, but then you lose your patch point, which is not really handy because I would like to use my tone to test a single chain. So say we've got a plug-in server and we wanted to use a compressor that needs to go onto this channel. Now we insert it onto the channel. But now the only way to see if the compressor is working is to actually generate an input, right? Which is a problem. If you're alone in the venue, how do you do that? You know, now you have to take a mic through each channel to see if it's working. So in this case, you can just put some tone or pink noise on there, and you can actually go to your server and see that the audio is coming in and out. And obviously it's important not to lose the patch point, because tomorrow we're going to need it. So also with personal monitoring systems, you want to be able to test the whole signal chain. So say if the band is using personal monitor, a mixer, you want to know that we're not just testing the auxes or the outputs going to those mixers, but we're actually testing the whole chain. So then having it there is really handy. Obviously again, trim, there's pads. Sometimes you'll see some of the preamps don't have pads, so some of the cheaper stage boxes, if you patch it, you're not going to have a pad, but all the local ins have, and all the VI racks do. This low cut here, important to know, is on the preamp. So if you're doing a recording and you're not sure if they're going to need a low cut on that channel, maybe don't use this, rather use the low cut here. So this is part of the software. That's basically another band on your EQ. But if you pop that in there, everyone that's getting signal from that stage track is going to get a low cut, which might make one or two people angry after in post. So you also have a variable low cut and a high cut there, which is under the input section. Pairing, you can pair two channels next to each other. So I'm going to see where I am. Let's quickly not do that. Let's go to... Often get excited about doing this, and by the time we listen to the show file, nothing is working anymore. So you have paired channel 1 and 2. Quickly do it here. So it's just linking those channels, two channels together to make a stereo channel. You can also pair a channel a layer down if you want to do that. Yes, question?
Can you only pay in increments of 2?
You can, yeah, it's only 2, but it doesn't have to be odds and evens. It can be any channel, any 2 channels next to each other or down. Phantom power, obviously straightforward. There's a phase invert switch on each of the channels and also on all the outputs. We've got our 2 patch points for those 2 inputs there, 1 and 2. And then obviously delay on each of the channels. Just a good thing to know is there's 2 little rotaries here. The one on the right hand side is to kind of get the delay as where you want it, and then if you want to kind of dial it in smaller increments, you need to go to the rotary to the left of it. It's normally on milliseconds, but you can also change that in the settings menu to meters, and they also do feet and inches for I guess the European scenarios. Just one other note under pairing. There's this format button here that allows you to change basically if the input's connected to the first channel or second channel, or left input 1 goes to, for instance, channel 2, or the other way around. It becomes significant when you are following a patch list and you're the monitor engineer. Then obviously the drummer wants the in-ears the overhead's the opposite way around, right? So you can go like that, and it just flips those signals around. Then there's two other options that are very handy as well. It's left, this is the first input to both the channels, and the second one to both the channels. This can help you in a troubleshooting scenario where you've got a keyboard playing and you're losing one of your channels, but you're mixing in front of us, and now your organ is playing a lead and everything is only on the left PA. So while the stage techs are busy looking for the problem, just to resolve it in that moment, you can just go like that, and then whatever's coming into the first input's now going out on both the channels, or the other way around, or you can mono sum them together if you maybe want to check the mono integrity. Labeling a channel. There's a short label and a long label, and it's these two. So the one at the top is the long, the one at the bottom is the short. I normally label both because when you use the iPad app, you normally see this label here. You see the, you're looking at this. So you can think about it as this is kind of an engineering label in a broadcast scenario. So this one will say RX 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here it will say the names, say John on RX1 and Susan on RX2 and so on and so forth. So normally in a broadcast scenario, you'll make an arrangement, or the administrator will actually lock some of the features out. On broadcast consoles, you can do that. Important thing to know here is, I want to demonstrate on there, but the angle's a bit weird. So if you change the name there, it's not changing the name there. So because obviously it gives you the option of having two, but it's quite irritating having to now label each one. So you just go backspace and backspace again, and it will just duplicate the name over. If obviously in most cases you need them to be the same. Okay, so that's our input section. Nice and easy. EQ, so EQ, you can flatten it there if you want to. Let me just dial something in there. So it's a 4-band. Oh, so weird working like this. There's a button where you can flatten it, and you can also switch it all on and off, or switch a specific band at a time on. So say there was a when you switch a specific band off, it'll become grey. You'll find that's kind of a feature that's been followed through the whole console. When something is highlighted, it means the feature's on. When it's grayed out, it's off. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about EQs. I'm sure you guys all know about EQs. There's dynamic EQ on the console. It's not on all the channels. That's why you'll see that channel's got a dynamic EQ in, but the one next to it doesn't. So you've got a bunch of these that you can insert where you need them. And this is one of the features that was added to the 1000 range. So it's under the insert button. We'll have a closer look at it now. And there's 8 of them. On the bigger systems, you've got 16 dynamic EQs. Does everyone know what a dynamic EQ is? The guys in the room, at least. Okay, so it's basically you're splitting up your bandwidth, your frequency range into 4 bands, and you're applying compression within that, but it is following a EQ curve. So you can really hone in on a specific frequency instead of just having the settings of the compressor. And yeah, so the EQ part is at the top, dynamic part's at the bottom, And then it also gives you the option of whether you want to compress or expand that specific band, which is handy as well. I use this with vocals often, especially female vocals that sing very softly in their low register, and then they go to their high register, and then there's always that one frequency, you know, it pops out like 2K or 2.4K or somewhere there, depending on the vocal. So now I'm sitting, riding this channel the whole time. The compressor's just not taking care of that frequency, and I've played around with the compressor. Then I go to this, and I'll say, let's go to that frequency, and I'll compress it. And I'll bring the threshold down to take care of it. Yeah, nice feature. Then every single channel has got a gate. We also have a de-esser, so you can decide whether you want to use your gate or your de-esser. De-esser is actually very handy when it comes to mixing corporates, because often on podium mics or in rooms that are not treated, you have to get trouble with the S's, so then you need to compress them, obviously. But obviously in that scenario, you're not going to need a gate, so it doesn't really matter that you don't have a gate. This is a pretty good starting point, by the way. I find normally the male vocal, you need to go slightly down, maybe open this up a little bit, but nice little feature there. Gate is a gate. Everyone knows what a gate is. A nice feature on the gate that I just want to mention quickly is this. Is the range. So that's basically whether when the gate's closed, if it's closed all the way or if it's open. So it will bleed through some of whatever is happening on the channel. Maybe that's something I need to demonstrate. I'm just going to use the solo in place feature on the console so we can all hear this. Please never put a gate on never put a gate on a bass. I'm just using it as an example, okay. So obviously if I pull the threshold up, at some stage the gate will start closing. It sounds horrible, right? So the range allows me to have some of it bleeding through. So now it's completely, I'm just going to get to the place. So there the bass is popping open the gate. The range allows me to decide how much of that, and you'll go like, okay, why would we need this? Well, we do need it. The reason why we need it is if we have a guy who plays a second snare, but he plays it with a stick and he plays it with blastics. So now I've got a problem, because now you have to decide whether you want the gate or not, because the gate's only opening on the snare when he plays the stick, and whenever he plays blastics, it's just gone. Now you push it over it, it's still not enough, so you need something from the snare as well. So at some stage, if it's a jazz set and he's doing it all the time, you're going like, wow, it's a lot of mixing here. So let's rather just open that gate up a bit. If it's a snare he doesn't play often, and obviously toms. If it's someone who sometimes plays his toms with sticks and sometimes, say, with a blastic or a brush, like jazz players do, and you are in the situation where you're forced to use the gate, then at least there's a middle way concerning how you use the tool. So I quite like this feature. Another little feature that's very handy is being able to say where we are triggering the gate, in what range. And you can actually have a listen. Let's quickly go to our bass. Where's my bass? No idea. Bass is on B. there it is. Hoping. It's not working now because we're not listening to the monitoring bus. So only us, we're going to hear it, but no one on the stream's going to hear it. So this allows you then to listen to what's happening, what's basically triggering that gate. Very handy with toms, so that your hi-hats and your snares are not opening your toms. Compressor is a compressor. There's just one thing I want to mention about this. It's got a tool that says auto MKUP, so auto makeup gain. So most compressors have a feature with that's obviously makeup gain. Sometimes it's a little knob, or it's auto in the sense that it'll get an average of the gain reduction and then add it back, right? That's what we want. We want whatever's coming into the compressor to be the same as what's going out. So say we're adding, I'm just going to get adding compression there. There we can see there's a huge amount of compression there. Too much, but it's just for demonstration purposes. And obviously when we switch this thing on and off, we want to match it, right? At the moment it's quite close anyway, but so makeup gain gives you the option of doing that. Auto makeup gain does that automatically, but on this console it's slightly different than any other consoles, is that it's not adding an average, it's adding it dynamically as it happens. So when you adjust your attack and your release, it also affects the auto makeup gain, which is an interesting feature because it's actually now, it's more of a dynamic tool than what it is making up an average gain offset. So I would normally just use this to make that up because it still works. But very, very handy is in the case where you've got a sadness at the end. I've unpatched my snare, so I'm just repatching my snare.
The music very well, and we thank you for facing it.
So what's going to happen now is, I'm going to go onto this kick channel, I'm going to toggle this auto makeup gain on. You can actually hear dynamically what it does to the kick. So when I let off the compression, then dynamically it's letting off the makeup gain as well. So the reason why it's a handy tool to have is when you are working, and this happens to all of us, we're working in a club or we're working on a PA where we're struggling to get the kick out. You know, the drum kit's just not giving us what we need, and we've moved the mic around and we've tried to tune the kick drum up, and it's just this flabby kick that's got no dynamics. We can actually now add some compression on that and regain some dynamics, and which is very often you just need that extra 3 or 4 dBs to get the quick kick moving. Some PA systems are very lazy in the low end, so if you've got a kick that's only got lows but no mids and highs, you just won't get a kick sound. So now you have to work with what you have. So this is kind of a tool to kind of just work around it. Obviously in jazz, you don't want your kick and your snare to be thundering, so you're not going to use it in a jazz setup, but maybe in a rock and like gospel. I mix a lot of black gospel music, and the kick and snare needs to be thundering, right? A lot of kick, a lot of snare, a lot of bass. And so I'll sometimes use that. Nice little feature, just good to know about. And then you also have a limiter on each of these channels. You can use both. Maybe something just to remember is it's coming through on the same gain reduction. So if you're using the limiter, say on a basis that goes nuts every now and then, and start slapping, but you don't want that much compression on the rest of the time, what you'll do is you'll switch off the compression, let him slap the bass, and tune that in, and then switch that off, tune your compression for the rest of the time when he's playing softly, and then you basically have them working together. Then the rotaries on the screen can also be used to dial in auxes or center groups or matrices. It looks like that. So if we tap at the top, we're looking at 1 to 8 and 9 to 16 in these two rows. And then I've only got one group set up, but there is up to 24. Obviously on the bigger consoles, both these rows will be filled out. Your buses, remember I said they're flexi, so any of them can be a aux or a group or a matrix. You can change them as you please, and any of them can be mono or stereo. Okay, then this is our assign section where we assign to left and right, or center if we're using the center bus. Pans are here. It also gives us the option of going into LCR mode, giving us a width option, which is handy. vMix, I'll talk about that in a section. And then obviously inserts. Inserts we're using all the time these days with plugins. And this is where we inserted our dynamic EQ. Remember I said 8 of them. But obviously with snapshots we can use our dynamic EQs in many other ways. The console also gives you the option of inserting an effects unit straight onto a channel, which I don't know why you want to do that, but I guess one scenario is, say you've spent all your auxes and you've got one saxophone player and he wants a lot of verb and he wants the verb all the time. Instead of now building another bus, you can just put the effects unit straight over there. And you'll be able to tune it. Let's quickly. It looks a little bit different. I just want to maybe show you that, just in case one of you guys needs to one day do that. I'm just going to go to a layer that I'm not using. There. Let's go FX4. I'm going to close this. You'll see the effects unit is now actually on the channel there, straight on. And now you can change it to whatever you want. You can say I want a large wall, fiddle with this. These lexicon effects sound incredible, really. They are lovely effects to work with. Under inserts, obviously, you also have the option, as I said, of going to an external. This is probably the place we'll use those local Midi and Dante the most, because you want to send a signal to a wave server and then process it there and then bring it back. And very simply, you just go set up, say where you want it to go. So in this case, we're just going to use local. Let's say we're going to use the last two. So it's going out there. Midi and Dante G 63, and it's returning probably in the same place, like that. I've made it stereo. It doesn't have to be stereo. You can make it mono as well, and that's it. So once it's selected like that, the signal gets to the insert point, goes to the server, comes back. Obviously very important is when you're sending things to a server is to decide at what point the signal is going there and coming back. because that changed your whole signal chain, right? It's going to change completely how that thing works. So you can choose here if it's pre or post your EQ and dynamics, and whether it's post fade. And then something else that I find can catch you out in this console is the fact, and I didn't speak too much about that today because I'm just thinking about the time, is because the console's got a huge dynamic range, massive. I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed on the input side, I mean, we've got 60 odd dBs worth of gain there. Then trim wise, we can go 18 up and down, right? Then makeup gain, there's another 12 there. And if you send that thing now to a bus, I mean, you can trim it up again on the bus, and you can add a compression on the bus. So what can sometimes happen is that because the console is extremely forgiving, it's, you know, it's floating point. So obviously when you're gaining something up, you're gaining up your headroom as well. But you need to keep in mind you're not gaining up the headroom of your plugins. So if you're going to use, sorry? It will clip your plugins like there's no tomorrow. So this is something to, and actually I like demonstrating this because it's actually crazy to see it. I'm going to go solo in place again so that we're all on the same page. So that's our bass with a huge amount of compression. So what I want you to pay attention to is what's happening here. So I'm pulling up the trim, you'll see it there. I've added 18 dBs of gain there, and you can hear the bass is still sounding beautiful, right? Because we've just done that. I'm scared to go high. So I've added another 17 dBs there onto the bass, and you see what's happening is it's not going into clip. So as long as we're not clipping our preamp, in the digital domain we'll never clip the bass guitar. So that's obviously, so there's two things happening. Number one, on this console it'll allow you to gain to +6, no problem. And nothing will be distorted because there's a huge amount of analog headroom. And then it still allows you to add all this gain as a trim or as an output on your compressor. So what often happens is you're working on the console and you're getting this nice analog feel, and you're going crazy, and you know the levels are actually quite hot, and you get to the point where you now want to maybe add a compressor on waves, and you're clipping that thing 7 love. So maybe it's a good thing to remember that, but there is a bit of play here where you can go down 18 dBs to try and rescue that plugin. But I found myself often at festivals, for some reason, you get excited and you pull a huge amount of gain because you just, yeah, it's rock and roll. And you start mixing, and then at some stage you want to go like, I wonder what's happening on waves, and like, wow, it's just the red everywhere. So the console's going to be a bit more forgiving than your service, your plugin service. You can obviously switch it on and off if for some reason the server's not doing its job. Direct out, same thing. We've got gain here. The console's got a feature where you actually, this direct out gain, you can track it. So when you pull the trim or the gain up, it'll, when you pull the gain up, it'll bring this direct out level down here. We're going to look at that tomorrow. Same thing, we can say where we're snatching the audio from. and then obviously you can send it to an output. Okay. Any questions about that so far? No questions. I just want to point this out because I find this extremely handy. Is when I started working in the console, I wasn't paying attention to the detail up here, but it's amazing. Like you can see your gain and what channel is this? Channel 1. There's quite a lot of detail happening at the top there, which actually allows you to stand back and look at the console and get a huge amount of information, which comes back to what they were trying to do when they built this thing. They want you to see a lot of information at the same time, get you to a place where you're not flipping through pages all the time, and also be able to change things quite quickly. There's a little, very small here, but you can see your pad, whether it's in or out, and the phantom power and the phase, whether the delay is being activated. And that 2 little lines means it's paired with a channel next to it or channel down. Other detail that's nice as well is the patch point. Above the name here, it'll show you the patch point. Which when you're just running the console natively like this, not a big deal, but once you've got 5 stage tracks connected, then you know it gets interesting. You want to know that it's rack 5 and it's mic 17. When a technician asks you, you'll just be able to look at the console and tell them immediately where the thing is patched. Okay, so that's for Stonix. That's basically our idea. The idea is where we touch, we work. It's obviously saving us time, hopefully. That we don't have to double click things and go into weird menus to switch on basic features. I spoke about the little function key. There's a feature next to it called isolation. The function key, the reason why it's called function and it's got an F is because it does have a second function. The first function is obviously to give us access to the second input, right? So if we push that, immediately you'll see the gains looking different because it's looking at a different patch point. The second function is something that comes in handy when you're busy mixing, and say it's a scenario where you're mixing a corporate, and now all of a sudden you need 2 things on the same layer, but they're not on the same layer, and there's going to be no time to program that or to put it on a user layer. So now, how do we do that? It's we go to the settings menu. There's a feature here saying channel F key. You guys won't be able to read it, but I'll read it out for you. And at the moment, it's set to input 2. We can also turn it so it says strip lock. Now, if I push the function key, I wonder if it's going to show it on here. Oh, no, it doesn't. Kick. I was hoping it will highlight it here. So what's happened now is there's a little lock next to it. So this is my kick and snare, and for visual purposes, I'm just going to push them all the way up. And now when I go through my input layers, it momentarily locks them into place. So it just bails you out for that second. This becomes very significant on the bigger consoles because if you've built your show file in a clever way, and for instance, all your effects returns or your playbacks and everything is nicely grouped together, you'll always be able to use the screen. So we don't often use it on this console, but on the meter bridge, if you push any of the banks, it flips the console there immediately, which doesn't make sense on this console because it's so small. But on the bigger consoles, you've got obviously another input bay there, and it will always be allocated here. So it also allows you then to lock that whole layer into place. So say, for instance, you are doing you want to do a playback, but there's bands changing over, and you have to be on that top layer. You can now select the layer and then lock the whole bank in place. you'll see all the little yellow lights on. Okay. You can still use both those features. They will still both work, but obviously the thing is you have to go and to the settings menu to toggle between the two. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is isolate. So I'm going to look at my notes, make sure we're still heading in the right direction. Isolate is basically same as what most consoles will call recall safe. This feature has got a huge amount of stuff that we can do with it, but it's going to take me a long time to get through it. So what's important for today is the scenario where you guys will need it. So in a basic scenario, you've got a band, and you've set up the band, and you do sound checks, maybe 7 different bands, and they all come one at a time. We sound check them, we make a snapshot for them, and then normally what happens after all the bands are we've created a snapshot for each band, we got a DJ, and it's a surprise, and we don't know about it. So it's not part of our programming. So we've created a snapshot, say where everything is muted, and we've got a snapshot where this band is on and another band there. And now we want to add in the DJ, and that's great. So we go to the first band, we add the DJ in. Whenever we now recall any other snapshots, the DJ will be gone, right? Because it's not part of our programming. So we'll quickly set up the DJ here, give it an input, say it's going to be 15 and 16, like that. You can give it a name, DJ, give it a color if you like. Right, there it is. As soon as I now recall any other snapshot, what's going to happen is I'm going to lose my patching, the fader is going to go down, and it'll be off again, right? So how do we solve this problem? We use recall safe. So let's quickly save this data into this. So there's the first band. If I go to any of my other snapshots, that data is gone. So I want this data now, this faders to be mixable over all my snapshots, so basically be able to mix them live. So I push the little ISO button, and now when I go to any of my other snapshots, you can see the snapshots changing in the top right there, but the faders are staying in place. So the application will be for say for your DJ or for your MC mic, because that's obviously the thing that links the bands together. The feature has got a huge amount of other potential as well that I can't go into now. So if you guys are interested in this, maybe tomorrow's session we'll go into it, because it's got 3 different modes as well. And it also allows us to merge different show files together. So if you've got an old show file and a new show file, or a system tech setup and a band setup, and we need to merge those two, we'll use the isolates for that feature. What's good to know is that whatever happens on the console, all that metadata still gets saved into our snapshot. So I'm going to go to quickly demonstrate that. And this is something that's very important to understand when you work on consoles. So I'm always wary to jump on a console and mix a big show on it that I don't know, because this is where consoles differ from each other. Some consoles, the metadata don't get saved. Some of them, they do save it, but you have to recall it in a certain way. On the Soundcraft, any movement you make or any button press you make, if you push store, you'll see the snapshot added to the top there, and you give it a name, call it band 2, all that data has been saved, regardless of whether I even have the isolates on or off. So I've added more isolations there. If I go and I say that fader that's isolated now is there, never do that please, and I say update, Oh, I have to maybe just make a change. If I deselect the isolate, that data is still there. On that specific snapshot, that fade is all the way to the top as well. It's very important to understand how your console works and whether it's doing this or not. Because if it does it, it means you can actually, when you do a sound check, isolate the whole console and be at front of house and mix the bands as if you're mixing live. And then afterwards, take your isolates out and have a perfect show, and I only have the right things in. So it's helping you speed-wise to do a faster sound check and to carry on the information from the one to the other. But the data is still there as long as you create a snapshot. Some consoles work the other way around, where you can only retrieve the data if you actually go say, listen, go into the snapshot, editing, and go and recall it there. So obviously, isolation is different from the scope. So when we talk about a snapshot, obviously, it's imagine the GoPro is taking a photo of our console, and the whole console is laid out. So this is one massive thing where we can see all the EQs and all the layers and everything, and it's just taking a photo. Gah! That's a snapshot, right? And this section here, we call it the scope, is what we are recording out of that snapshot. So people always ask me, but what's the difference between features being switched on and off in the scope and whether we're using isolate? The difference is that this is the data, the metadata within that specific snapshot. And you'll see if I go between two different snapshots, there's different data. Look, and that one is red, and then that one is green. When I isolate something, it ignores all of this, but it still saves the data. So that's the two differences. An isolate is over all my snapshots, and the switching on recall data or metadata within the scope is specific to each snapshot. There's some scenarios where that it becomes you have to decide whether you're using the one or the other. But I think in this case, it doesn't really matter. In most scenarios, you'll just be able to switch the isolate on and leave it. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about other ways to use isolation to build a snapshot quickly, a show file quickly, and to afterwards decide what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. You can also use isolations to transfer data between different snapshots very quickly, instead of having to physically go and copy it over. Then just coming back to the layout, which is something we obviously want to finish today still. We've got our meter bridge as an overload button at the top. You saw it when we played with the bass, that it didn't come on, which is awesome. On and off button, straightforward. That's the little LEDs to the bottom of each of the meter bridges, obviously indicating your gain reduction for the limiter and for the compressor. Then this is obviously our short names. There's a little light to the top of our on button, which indicates whether a aux is in pre or post mode. Right. The console's got mute safes, so if you want to mute safe a button, it's under this menu here, which is our headphones. And and then we come to the select button. So I'm going to work this way. Something I want to talk about now is a feature called gang. I just want to quickly mention it while we're here, because it's something we need to talk about. Another thing to remember when you work on VIs is often on consoles you'll be able to go into a menu and say, I want all my auxes to be pre, or I want all my auxes to be post. Those global settings is something that the Soundcraft doesn't do at all. You use something called gang to change a global setting. once again, it comes back to that methodology of trying to rather keep us on the console and using the buttons we have instead of going into a menu to perform a feature. So gang feature, this is what it does. I'm just going to find a layer that I haven't completely broken. You select it, and I normally like to clear my gangs because this is something that can actually potentially get you into trouble if you don't know what on the console is ganged. But this is exactly what a gang does. It momentarily links a certain range of channels together. You can also link the whole console. So if you want to change an aux from pre to post, or you want to switch, you've got a snapshot where you want to switch everything off or on, or you want to switch all the phantoms on or off, you'll use this tool to do that. So you can select specific channels like that, or you can also, so say those were selected and I want to do a global change to the console. We'll switch the gang on and we'll hold it in. And now when we go through the console, every single channel is selected. So this will now allow me to do a global change. Like, say I want to make a mute snapshot, I can do that, switch everything off, create a snapshot, store that, and call it mute. Or I want to clear an aux, or I want to switch all the compression on and off. So anything that you need to change on, or you want to switch all the isolations on or off, or you want to, whatever. I mean, the options are pointless, endless, not pointless. We do use the gang for some other features as well. One of them is to sequentially patch a bunch of inputs. I don't know how you guys do your patch list, but a lot of guys, they will write their patch list exactly how they're going to put it on the console, which kind of makes sense. I tend not to do that, but it doesn't matter. So say we're starting on channel 49 and we're going to go to channel 56, and these are going to maybe be vocal microphones. We're going to go to input. I'm going to say it's going to be a Midi input. Well, it's not available. Let's say it's going to be mic 1. So now it's asking me on the screen, do I sequentially want to patch all the channels that are ganged together? I say yes. And what's happened now is, if we go here, layer D, it's patched at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. You can gang the whole console. If you say you've wrote your patch list is perfect, exactly, you don't want to change anything, you can gang the whole console. You'll go to the first channel that you want to patch. You'll say patch, and then patch the whole thing. You can also unpatch in a similar way. So so it's patched to channel 1 there. I'm going to just push it again. Oh wait, no, I'm talking nonsense. So what I did, this little button says none. I pushed the none, and it's unpatched the whole range as well. Which is handy. Maybe you're using it's the same band, but it's a different stage track or different inputs, and you just want to use the show file, but you want to give it different ins and outs. And obviously then, the very important thing that I get the most phone calls about is how do we make things pre and post, the whole console pre or post. Very simple. We push the gang button, we hold it in like that. I'm going to show this on the offline editor as well. There's a button here that says pre and post, and I just select the rotary. It's this rotary here. Rip that button there, and it looks like this. So obviously all the channels are now ganged together, so it doesn't matter which one I change. I can just say I want to change aux 4 there. Now every single channel going to aux 4 is now pre-fade. I use this, and I wish you had a better view of the screen. Often when I set up stuff that are similar, like a string section, there'll be 12 violins, and at some stage I'm going to actually go in and tweak them nicely, but I just want to get a starting point. Or I've got a choir and there's 24 microphones. I want to show you how much time this saves you. Just want to clear it. So I'm going to go to the patching, patch it. It's asking me if I want to sequentially patch. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to switch on all the compression, dial it down, say it's a 58, so I'm going to do a 58 type E EQ here. Put in a low cut, switch them on, and maybe send all of these channels to a bus. It takes a few seconds to now do all of that, and I'll normally just get all of them to sing. I'll pull up the gain and then go through them one by one. Yeah, so it helps you. The thing you need to remember when using gangs is the console will always remember the last gang points, so don't shoot yourself in the foot and accidentally. So the workaround is obviously just clear your gangs before you start using them. Once you start using them, it becomes one of those things that you use all the time. You want to quickly change this, or send things to an aux, or take them all out, or send a whole bunch of channels to an effects unit. And it's just nice just to go boom, select them all, and pull up one rotary and you're there. Also very handy for clearing data. Now I've taken everything I've done is now back to where it was. Sorry?
So that's literally a do to all function that you select.
Yeah, do to all. So he's asking if it's a do to all function. That's exactly what it is. And it's a setup tool, for instance, in the case of the patching. Great, so we spoke about the layers. This is very simple. On the left-hand side, we've got fixed. We've got some mute groups. I'm not going to go into that really because it's so simple to set them up. You just push the setup button and it tells you exactly what to do. So you just select the button, you select the channels, and that's it. VCAs work in exactly the same way. And this is now, I don't know if you've noticed the few times I've gone into a section that I haven't touched the main screen even once. We've patched channels, we've done EQs, we've done compression, we've sent things to auxes, we made auxes pre and post. What else did we do? I mean, all the features that we've worked on so far, even quickly building this mute group, there was no need to go into a menu even once. And that is the kind of methodology. That's how you want to think when you work on this console. The first time, I remember Ray always used to say, when in doubt, read, right? This console, it's going to help you a lot, because if you just read what section you want to work on, you don't have to go look for the setup button because it's always there. So I wanted to set up a mute group, and I just push the setup button. There's a whole description telling you what to do. But very simply, you just select the mute group you want to use and then select the channels. And that's it, done. And that counts for almost all the setup tools. There's one or two little things where you want to make something from milliseconds to meters, or you want to check the status of a stage rack, or you want to set up a network. But you can kind of think it of stuff you'll do when you are building the show file, and things you might do when you're mixing on the console. All the setup features you'll use when you're mixing, you'll always find them here. So that's the setup button for the mute and VCA. So right there, there's the encoders, there's its setup button. These encoders you can manipulate, there's their setup button. If you want to build a custom layer, for instance, so here's a layer that's only got one VCA and 2 microphones on them. It's a user layer. If we want to manipulate it, once again, exactly the same thing. It's user 5. I want to add on this fader a input channel. It's going to be the channel called David. There it is. So you see how I'm changing setup stuff on the console by just using the setup button on the specific section. So this is our input section, muters and VCAs, encoder section, output pages, user define, masters, left and right. There's a fader for the center as well, and then also our monitor pages here. And with all of these, all their setup and all their settings stay on the console. I never have to go into a menu. Which makes, when you're mixing and you quickly want to change something, I appreciate the fact that I don't have to go and go into a menu and then go click through all the pages to bring them up and go look for it, because that's got nothing to do with mixing, right? It's not something you really want to do where you're mixing the band. I've always got this joke where I say, like, you go to a festival and then you'll see everyone's watching the band except one person in front of a house engineer, because he's like looking down at the console trying to do something, which is quite weird. I mean, the person whose whole life is music is not enjoying the music. It tells you something's wrong, right? Okay. Just want to see notes-wise where I am. Gang, copy and paste. So we still need to look at the mute groups. How are we doing for time? Got an hour left. So layout-wise, inputs there. Spoke about that. Something that's tucked in here under the on button is our copy and paste features. Once again, there's kind of two layers to this. And there's the easy way to just copy something, which works very similar to how you'll do on a PC or a Mac. Control C, Control V will copy something. Very important to know when you go into a feature like this, copy or paste, or some of the setup features, you are still entering a setup mode. So some of the mixing would be limited during that time. And you'll see it because, for instance, when you go into copy and paste, you'll see there's a little green, yellow line there indicating that we are now want to copy something. So I'm going to do a very crazy EQ here. Hoping you guys can see it like that. Very ugly. I'm going to say copy that EQ. I want to paste it to all these channels. So you can just touch and drag if you want to do it multiple. I'm going to clear this channel quickly. Copy a clean EQ and just paste it. You can obviously skip ones over. Same works for compression. You can say copy the compression and then paste them where you need them. Important to remember, same as on a computer, the last thing that you've copied will remain, right, in the RAM till you switch the computer on and off, right? Same thing here. So if I say copy and I take the copy feature off, it's still stored. So if I hit paste again, yeah, and you're just touching the sections that you want to copy and paste. There is one pitfall that sometimes happen is people want to copy the compression and the EQ over a whole bunch of channels, and they do this. They say copy, select. If you say paste, and you paste it onto the next channel, you're going to paste all your naming as well. So don't do that. Be specific about it, what it is. Don't be lazy. Be specific about what are the things that you want and what are the things that you don't want to copy. So don't just grab everything. Say I want to copy whatever's happened in that section here, output section, whether it's going to direct out or whatever, and I want that, and I want that. And then say paste, and bring it onto the channels that you need it. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit about more advanced features when it comes to copy and pasting. You'll see tomorrow, if you guys are here and you're interested, there's a lot of the stuff, it's almost like you won't pick the feature up if you don't know where to look for it. Because you need to remember, these VI consoles often go into a broadcast scenario, or even in a church. They're very popular in churches, where we're working with volunteers, and you want to keep some of the features kind of off the surface, if I can put it that way. So there's some crazy stuff you can do with isolates, and there's crazy things you can do with copy and paste, and how you transfer and keep it, and even how you delete or clear data off a channel. But that's kind of stuff that you want there only when someone is looking for it, and don't want someone to accidentally do it. So tomorrow we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so very simply, that's how it works. Vistonics, I'm not going to talk about this. The only thing that's important here in this section is the pre and post, which we spoke about. So when you select our buses, we are able to change the pre and post point. Everything else in that section is just visual stuff. So what you want to see on your rotaries. So I'm not going to spend too much time there. Outputs, very simply, A will always be, when you start the console up, your bus 1 to 8, 9 to 16, and so on and so forth. As I said, you can manipulate your buses to be whatever you want them to be. On the VI 2000 and 3000, 5000, 7000, there's an additional little button here that says all buses. And you can just push it, and then you'll see all the buses at once laid out on all the channels, regardless of, right across the console. With this frame size, we had a bit of an issue because there's so many inputs, and how do we get to all of them? So we had to repurpose that button to give us another input page. So how you get to your buses on this console is by using the screen. It says mix. Mix 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 17 to 24. The colors at the bottom there refers to the colors. Sorry, I'm going to have to blow my nose. I'm so sorry I have to do this. Just excuse me for a second. All right, am I back? Okay, so the colors at the bottom there refers to something we called fader glow. It's also something we adopted from Studer. Studer wanted to visualize where we are on the console by differentiating between different buses. Some of the smaller consoles even use it to show whether we are a pre or post. And on the Studer consoles, you can change this fader glow to make it whatever you want. So you can decide you don't want to stick with the normal blue for a matrix. You want to make it any other color. On the VI consoles, it's predefined. So it basically tells you whether it's a group or a matrix. You'll see, I'm going to quickly change it. So these are all set to auxes. So let's say I'm going to make aux 5 a group. Immediately you'll see it goes green. And matrix will be blue like that. There you see it. We can maybe make that one like that. Where it becomes interesting is when we're actually sending things into those buses. Because this is something that can be confusing on consoles, is when you start working quickly, when are we busy sending channels to left, right, or are we busy sending channels to an aux? And is that aux pre and post, or are we, So as soon as you go to the aux, you'll see all the channels feeding that aux has now become orange like that. I actually did build this so we can quickly test it to see. Okay, so for the guys who are online, what we're going to do now is we're going to select our aux just to demonstrate that we're sending something to it. Obviously, you guys are not going to hear it. You only hear it on my mic because it's coming through a little floor monitor. So very simply, if we want to send a feed to a aux, we'll select the aux. We now know that we are sending to an aux because all the faders are orange. In the groups, you'll see it's green, and the matrices, blue, and the matrices, the blue for the matrices and green for the groups. And for you, so this is a scenario, for instance, for building. Right? Other nice feature, obviously, we can see it's pre there. As I said, the VCA in the beginning here is fixed. It's the part of the console that's fixed, but all of these you can manipulate as you please. So you can decide if you're using, say you're mixing front of house and you're only using 4 auxes, but you're using 4 matrices, or you're using a MC mic all the time, you can now utilize what would normally be the output section as both. So you can say, let's only have monitor 1 and 2 and 3 there, for instance. But this channel here, we want to just have nothing. And then the next channel over needs to be the lead vocal. There, right. So once again, they're completely flexible, same as your user groups. At this stage though, there is something that is quite important to decide, is whether you want the setup that you've just built to stay like this over all your snapshots. Because if you're mixing a theater piece, obviously for each snapshot you only want to see the mics, for instance, that are on stage, right? You don't want to see the same stuff all the time. It'll be pointless. So you want to build your show file so that when you recall your snapshots, the console is bringing the right channels in front of you, so you don't waste time going through layers. So there's something I just want to mention is, if you go here to the setup here, there's a little button that says output fader ISO assign. I need to now think where to do this on here. It's this guy here. So this is just for the input, but it's exactly the same for the output section. Once again, when you go into the setup, you'll see there's little numbers going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that refers to the user group here. It's exactly the same on the output section. So we basically assign what we want to each of these users. So there's David and Lee. So this was a discussion. So you can say 25 needs to be a VCA, for instance. The important thing to remember now at this stage is whether we want it to stay the same or whether we want it to change. So in this case, this little button is on, so it's isolating this data from the snapshots. Same as what we did when we isolated that one channel, that was the DJ. And that's exactly the same for this section here. Once we've decided what we want in here, we need to decide if it's only part of this snapshot. So there you will see it looks different. Or whether we want it to stay the same over all our snapshots, then we'll have to select. Tomorrow I'll talk about how do we link input pages and what we're seeing on the output page together, because that's also a nice little feature. I think for time's sake we're going to push on because we've got an hour left for this live part of today's training. Let's copy and paste, mute groups, basic ISOs, great. Okay, Talkback section is up here. Obviously when it comes to mixing a live show, and this is something I wish someone taught me when I was a student, is you have to be able to talk to your band all the time, and we forget about this because we are like obsessed, we love the music and we want to get the band going and we're only focusing on getting a nice drum sound or whatever, and then the band gets there and it's chaos because we can't talk to them or they can't talk to us. So I encourage you, doesn't matter how big or small the setup is, to always think about Talkback and always think about your comms. If you want to work in corporate, don't forget that we're going to have comms, or there's going to be some kind of communication, and then you're in a scenario where the director is forcing you to wear comms when you're trying to mix front of house. So you have to think about how we're going to do it. Tomorrow I'm going to show you some scenarios on how to make it easier. The simplest way and the way you do it when you don't have a complicated setup, it's like this. You take a normal XLR, and we've got a SM58 that's also a shaker, and we just go in here. I'm hearing some music coming through the monitor. So all I've done is I've just gone into the front here. There's about 3 or 4 different ways of doing Talkback on this console. I'm going to show you the easiest way of doing it. There's a little gain pot here. This can also be a trim if you are grabbing your Talkback source from somewhere else. If you're not going in here, but your Talkback source is coming off a Midi stream, or it's a director or a hot mic from a comm system, you select setup, and yes, 3 different buttons. It's these guys here, and 90% of the time this is what you're going to be using. It allows you to just go here to setup and say what I want to assign to each of the presets. So once again, you don't have to go and look for it. It's right there. Setup, it says Talkback and Oscillator. Click it. And we're going to say preset 2 is going to talk to monitor 1. See now, why is it not grafting? Okay, so what happened there was that I've previously on the show file assigned another input to the Talkback source. So when it's blank like that, Talkback source, it's taking it from the front here. But the nice feature is this can be anything. So what many times have happened to me is I'm busy with a setup, And now I'm like still 2 hours away from being ready, but the dance director or some choreographer gets there and he wants to talk on the wedges to direct some dancing, but I'm like, I don't even know where my Talkback mic is. Then I just grab any radio mic and I know it's coming in 16, I click it, and then I select where I want it to go and it will go there. So it's very easy to manipulate. If we want to use the input in the front here, we need to obviously, and this is how the console is normally set up. It's like that. 2 2 1 2. Yep. Yeah. 2 2. It's off. 2 2 1 2. Hope for the guys on stream you'll be able to hear me talking in the room and it being very quite loud. And yeah, so let's talk about who do you need to talk to. When you the front of house engineer, you obviously need to talk to the monitor engineer, and you need to be able to talk to the band. There is a million ways of setting this up, and the console will actually, if you use this input, it will give you 5 destinations. If you use any other input on the console combined with a mute grip, it will give you six different destinations. I found with Talkback, it's one of those things that if you do it wrong, it can potentially mess up your whole show. If you don't think about who needs to talk to whom at what time. Especially, and this is the tip that I wish someone would have told me, is whenever there's an additional element to your show. So say you're a front of house engineer, not a big deal, right? If the front of house and monitor engineer, definitely you need to be able to talk to him. If there's a director, you need to be able to hear the director, and the monitor engineer, you need to be able to hear the director, and you need to decide who talks to him. Is it just monitors or just front of house? You guys need to have a conversation. If you've got an OB van outside, you need to know, is this OB van at some stage going to link to us in the room, or who's boss here? Because if that's the case, and we're the boss of where this show's going, we need to be able to talk to them, and they need to be able to talk back, right? If you're running a show where you're mixing from front of us and there's in-ears and wedges, how do I cue? If the director's sitting in front of us and the artists are not hearing comms, how do we cue them? So then all of a sudden it becomes very interesting, because you can't do this. You can't go like, okay, artists go on stage in a corporate. So now you need to think about, how do we do that? Let's rather spin the aux and put another speaker backstage so we can call them, or use a direct out to talk into the comm system. So whenever you mixing a show, and this is normally shows that are corporates that got entertainment or award ceremonies where there's broadcast facility involved. That's when you need to start having the conversations, because what will happen is you'll do all that work and you'll get to the point where you want to rehearse, and now all of a sudden everyone wants to talk to each other, and it's chaos, and you can't do your work because theoretically it's still audio, eh? Communications. It's audio, so they will get on your neck about it. So I normally do it like this. I'll use my presets to normally talk, if I'm mixing monitors, to this little none button, by the way. You've seen me use it a few times. It's quite handy. Say those were my wedges. I'll have one for wedges. I'll have preset 2. Say these were my in-ears, for my in-ears. Those are stereo, that's why it's going left, right. And then normally one of these, if I'm mixing front of us, it can be an evac system. So go left, right. Or I will use it to talk to front of us. Here you can get creative how it's getting to front of us. You can use a center, or you can use a matrix or aux, doesn't really matter. Those are the 3 ones you'll probably always have. talking to talent and talking to tech. You can, however, and I'll show you how to do that tomorrow, create more ones, because there's an external out on this, and you can internally talk to specific auxes, only one at a time. We're not going to worry about that too much now. But in the scenario that I've built now, I've broken something again. What did I break? 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. Yep. So those are talking to my wedges. 2, 2. Yep. And those they can be in-ears, and this could then be a matrix going to front of us or an aux going to front of us. Super easy, right? Okay. Then also something to be aware of is we've used the oscillator a few times today, but it's under the Talkback section. So it does actually say it there, but it's so small that it's easy to miss. It says oscillator. When you want to send the oscillator to buses, then you're going to have to switch that feature on. So on the left here, you can choose whether you want pink noise, white noise, or a sine wave. If it's on sine wave, you need to decide what frequency you want. Then if you want to send, and this is obviously something we use all the time, if you want to send the oscillator to a bus, this little button needs to be on. It gives you the option of switching it off, because you need to be able to have the oscillator on like that, so that you can send it to the channels, remember? So the oscillator needs to be on, but it's an additional feature to send it to the buses. So it differentiates between the two. I need to be careful now that I don't kill anyone. I'm going to go all the way down. And I'm going to assign it to... So there we can hear a tone coming out of the wedge. And that's obviously pink noise we'll use to test our wedges on stage. I also actually use pink noise and white noise, pink noise and tone to calibrate my amps and to calibrate my in-ear systems, because if you've worked on more than one, you'll realize they're all very different. So once again, you can just drag your finger over this assignment like this. Can't do it on the mouse, but I'll show you, yeah. You can just drag your finger across, and if you want to undo it, there's a little button that says none, and they're all off. On stereo auxes, it'll go on, and then left, and then right. So if you're doing stereo in-ears, this is obviously important to see if left is left and right is right, and the cabling going from the stage rack to the transmitter is the right way around. And then when you're done, you can just hit none, and it will undo all of that. You can also, this is something that happens every now and then, is that the technicians are trying to troubleshoot something on stage, but we haven't put any of the backline on stage, so there's nothing to generate a signal with, or they don't have a microphone or anything, or they want to check a line level, and now the mic is not a good option to check it, or they're looking for their DIs. Then you can generate a tone on the console and just send it to a specific output. So it's a test. So you're setting up a testing tool. So you just click there. You'll go to your stage rack and send it to the last channel on the stage rack. so they can then plug in, and you can tell them, listen guys, I'm going to send you 1K and whatever, it's going to be at -6 normally. Oh, it's difficult. Anyway, -6. So they can then use just a piece of cable to troubleshoot a certain problem, which is very handy. Then there's one more thing here. I said we can send a talkback signal directly out without using a preset, and we'll recap this tomorrow. And it's this button here. So this, you can use it for anything, but I very often use it to either talk to my front of house engineer or to talk into the comms system. And what they've done is, often when we are doing a show and there's an outside broadcast van, they will do the comms and the wireless comms, and we'll be talking into that system. So at some stage they'll come, listen, can we have the feed from you that you're going to talk to us on, but now you're busy with your setup and you physically need to talk on that mic the whole time so they can test it. So the workaround for that scenario is this. You'll have this on and you'll say oscillator to talkback, and you'll push that external button, and then whatever's patched here will then get that tone. So this allows you to leave the technicians to continue with, you know, whatever, getting the speaker or getting the comm system, getting the cable, getting the power supply, and you can tell them, listen, when you hear the pink, you know, it's clean, and at that stage we can go over to physically testing the line. So it's a nice little tool just to make sure that the comms are actually going to the right place. External out is basically just this patch point here. And one of the other features of this external out is obviously to create a talkback between two consoles without using any buses. Because as you know, if you've ever mixed a show, input channels and buses become expensive quite quickly. Before you know it, you don't have any anymore, and you don't really want to spend 3 auxes just to get to 3 different destinations. So if you are in a scenario where the console is spent and you've used every single input, every single output, and there's not even a place to patch the talkback in, mic in somewhere, and you're going with this option, yeah. Now you still need to get the signal out of the console. You can use this external button to just do a straight T-piece from this preamp to a specific output, and you just patch it here. And a little trick that I've learned when I'm running more than one console, and if there's talkback involved and when there's playback involved, doesn't matter what console it is, I just set up Dante between the two, just to have it there. Or if I can do Midi, if it's 2 of the same consoles, I just put a Midi cable between the 2. Because all these things, all these talkback and playback coming from front of us, and me maybe needing to talk to a specific place, now becomes a non-issue, because you've got 64 channels going in both directions. So I would normally just use local, whatever, doesn't matter, any of these, that one there. Okay, so that's my line going there. And then this brings me back to my monitor section. So make sure I did not skip anything over here. Talkback. So obviously we need to be able to hear the signal coming back. So you can either just do a tie line. If it's a Dante coming from front of us, or if it's a physical cable, you can go straight into a speaker like we're having on the floor here. And when you talk, the front of house engineer talks, we're hearing him here. There's a million ways of doing this, right? But one of the ways that I found is the most handy is to use the console's got a talkback return as well. And tomorrow, hopefully, we're going to have some time to demo that. But the talkback return allows you now to say where I want this return to also go, whether it's to my in-ears or to a specific monitor bus. And that's this little guy here. So I can maybe say my mic is going to front of house on there. This can also obviously be doesn't have to be Midi, it can be a physical line, it can be AS3, can be analog or digital, doesn't matter. But let's say in this case, I'll be talking to front of house on Dante 63. And they're also returning to us on the last channel. I'll switch this on. Go to talkback return. Okay. So when I'm talking to them, I'm pushing external there, I talk on the mic, it goes straight there, and he's obviously got it patched on his console somewhere. Or, as I'm doing now, what we're doing is we're bringing it into the designated feature, which is called Talkback Return, which takes us to this section here. This is where all the monitoring on the console is happening. We've got the phones at the top here, which is this output in the front of the console. It's this one here. And we have 2 monitor buses. So the console's got 3 stereo monitor buses that you can use any way you please. Once again, we're going to hit the setter button. Looks like that. It's in a very odd place on the offline editor, right in the corner. It's there. And this is what it looks like. Tomorrow, if we have more time, I'm going to talk in depth about all the stuff happening here. But what's important for you at the moment is that we've got these 3 monitor buses, so monitor A, monitor B, and phones. And often when we set up Talkback, we forget that every single console that's ever been manufactured that is half decent have a monitor bus, and we don't use it. For some reason, we don't use it. We build our own auxes, and we plug our own mics, and we use mute groups, and we're spending all that real estate just to get a Talkback mic happening. So what I've started doing is, even if I'm the front of house engineer, and I'm using a powered speaker for Talkback, and the only thing that's going through that speaker is the Talkback coming from monitor land, I will still run it through whatever feature is available on the console. Because, number one, you're not spending inputs and outputs, and number two, now you've got control over it. So this is the control that we have over our 3 different buses on a VI console. Monitor A, monitor B, and headphones. They are all stereo. And we can very quickly decide what we want to hear. So in this scenario, we're not hearing anything. So we can push the buttons on the console, nothing will happen. Or we can say we want to hear whenever we solo something in or solo something out, or a talkback return. It's also got 2 user groups here that can be set up as background music or evac or anything else. But the one that's important at the moment, say this was a front of house console, we'll do it like this. We'll have this fader up, make sure it's on monitor A, because this flips it between monitor A and B. And we'll do this. So now any signal that's coming into the talkback return is now going to monitor A. And the cool thing now is now we actually have a fader for our talkback monitor as well. The nice thing is when you follow the infrastructure of what the console is providing, and I suggest you find out what that is on every single console that you work on, all of a sudden you've got so many options on what you can hear. If I'm mixing in front of us and the AV guys, while we're in the show, want to say, listen, is my AV working? No problem. Undo that. Click it there. Go to the channel. And solo it. Now, that channel is soloing to this bus here. So now you're using your Talkback monitor as a solo bus. Okay. So once again, what's important for today is we need to decide how we want the console to work with regards to what be soloing to monitor A, monitor B, or the headphones. So you can go PFL or AFL on the input side, and also on the output side you can select whether it's PFL or AFL. Solo in place is what I used previously. And then when the consoles, when you recall a default show file, this is normally how it's set up. And I've actually over the years started using it just like this. The reason is, I'm going to quickly show you what it does. Whenever I solo only one channel at a time, it will always give you the PFL of that specific channel. So I can go only the kick or the kick and the snare. You can check PFL, right? Going to the monitor. So for the guys on the online, I'm going to kill that, but you'll see, you'll have to listen to this or just visually look at this. So this is my monitor, this is what we're hearing in the room. Regardless of where the fader is up and down, as soon as I select more than one channel, this is now PFL. AFL. The reason why that's important is when we're working, especially when we're monitoring on monitors, or we're working on a wedge as a monitor engineer or an in-ears, when we're listening to one channel at a time, normally the scenario is we want to either listen to what's going on there, we want to listen to noise, we want to be able to do EQing or compression. So we don't want to hear all the other panning and stuff. I mean, it's horrible if you're busy working on a tom, and there's a crackle on the tom or a buzz on the tom, and you're trying to work around it or EQ it or gate it out, and the tom is panned to the left in your in-ears. Or you're using a wedge and you've gone out of right, and now you're not hearing it at all because you're not hearing the other channel. You don't have the luxury of having left and right up. So this often, when you are mixing on a console, you need to go back here and you need to fiddle with the AFL and PFL to get it to work the way you want. Here, whenever it's one channel, it'll always be pre-fade, and whenever you select more than one channel. So a great scenario, for instance, is when you are busy EQing your toms. You'll listen to one at a time, but if these were the tom channels, you'll hold in the first solo and you'll select all your toms like that. Now you're listening to the level difference between your toms and also where they've been panned, which is extremely helpful when you are mixing either for a broadcast scenario where you're mixing to studio monitors, or when you're mixing in-ears. Then one other thing that we need to look at today concerning the monitoring section. Solo in place obviously is what I was using previously to solo to the master bus and to the monitor bus, so that our friends on the webcast is also hearing what we're hearing. So they'll be hearing music now when we're not hearing it, because we're not listening to left and right. So let me quickly just do that. So when you're mixing in front of us, you can't, to solo something over the PA, you need to put the console in solo in place, right? So it's muting every single channel and only keeping that channel open. That obviously you can't do this when you're mixing monitors from front of us, but if you only mix in front of us, works like this. You have to select it here, solo in place, set button there. So now it's muted every single channel except the bass channel that we are listening to. So that's a nifty tool that you use when you mix the front of house engineer and you're busy doing sound checks and you don't have the luxury of near field monitors. That'll be a way of just soloing a channel to the PA. Sure, very important to switch this thing off. It will time out if you don't solo anything for I think it's about a minute or so. It's changed over the years. It used to be 3 minutes. It will switch off by itself. Obviously, big no-no during the show. You can't do that at all. Okay, the rest of the monitor setup we'll tackle tomorrow. The formats and the user setup and monitor setup. There's some funky stuff we can do there. As long as you guys understand kind of what's happening here and how to use this, obviously utilize monitor A as a talkback section. That's how we do it. Great, so we've got, not a lot of time left. What I want to talk about now, and we're going to talk about this in the practicals today, is basically what's happening on the screen here. And the reason I leave it for last is because it's not a huge amount of stuff, because as I said, most of these features, setup features, is happening here on the console, and it's quite easy to get there. But there is a few little things, and the one that's most important for today is obviously a show file. Like, you need to know how to create a show file. One of the practical stuff we're going to do today is to show how and how to get there quickly, and make sure you guys know exactly how to patch ins and outs and stuff like that. Let's have a look at what it looks like. There's one little button here at the top that says menu. And it's got these little tabs, and all of them are setup related, but stuff you'll probably do prior to show. One good thing to know is if anyone ever asks you about what firmware the console's running, this is where you'll look at it. It's right there. You can see the uptime of the console and the date and time. Is that correct? Just a side note on dates and times on consoles. Since I've started doing support on consoles, you can't imagine how important this is. Because if your calendar is set to the wrong time, or to the wrong date, and your clock is set to the wrong time, it's very difficult. If you send me a show file or a snapshot and I look at that data, I don't know if it's set to 1974, it doesn't really mean anything. Like you're saying, oh, yesterday I was doing this on the console, and then all of a sudden I recall that snapshot, and then everything was gone. If the show file is saved to a few years back, it's very difficult to now correlate what the issue is and what's happening on the show file. So it's kind of a small little thing, but normally when I work on a console, I just quickly check that the time is roughly there and the date is on the right day. The other reason why it's important, oh, by the way, this is just the brightness of the screen. Okay. The other reason why it's important is because of show files. So obviously, how do we go to a default show file? We select default there. And these are the defaults. They read only, so you can't write over them. And my process normally is I'll recall one that's closest to what I want to use. Most of the consoles only have a front of house and a monitor one. This console's got 2 additional show files, which is the 16 fader ones. And the only thing 16 fader means it's already populated inputs over both banks. Obviously on this console that can be an issue, because if you're mixing front of house, you rather have only inputs, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to disconnect this computer from the console to allow me to recall a default show file. So I'm going to say FOH, load. Do you want to save changes before loading a new show file? Yes or no? Whenever this thing comes onto the screen, read it. Yes, like I've gotten myself into so much trouble. Like you're tired and you've been mixing, Ian will know, you've been mixing a festival for 3 or 4 days and your brain's not in the moment anymore. And it can ask you, you've got an issue on the console and you've lost all your monitor outputs for some reason. And you decide, listen, I'm just going to switch the console on and off. That's going to resolve the problem. And it's asking you whether you want to save. And you say yes. And you've just deleted, you've just lost all your outputs, and now it's gone forever. So whenever there's a dialogue on the screen, I've now developed a very healthy respect to reading this all the time. Because you get so used to just quickly saving it that you can just go yes or no. In this case, I'm going to no. And now we can see everything is back to blank inputs. We go to our Vistonics view. You can see there's no EQs. And now I'm going to mention it probably another 10 times today. One of the most important things at this stage is to make sure that you can save a show file. Why would I say that? The reason why I'm saying that is if you can't do this part here on any console, or on any computer, or on a personal monitoring system, or on a pedal board of a guitar, it means there's something wrong with the drive. And you don't want to touch any hardware where you can't save. I mean, what's the point? You're like, it's a disaster waiting to happen. So I know I'm doing it at the end now, but this is the first process. After I've checked my time and date, the first process I do on any console is I make sure that I can save a show file. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you now spend 2 hours labeling everything. You've got inputs, you've made your auxes pre and post, you've got outputs, you've tested everything, and you go like, great, let's save. Oh, can't save. Hard drive's full, hard drive's damaged, hard drive, something issue with it. And it's just telling you, sorry. And just remember, every single console has got either some flash memory or a SSD or a spinning disk in there. So it's a matter of time. It might still work because maybe the operating system is running on a different drive. But if you can't save, you're going to be in very, very deep trouble. So I normally do that and make sure the time and date looks cool. Then the next thing I do is this. I go to the snapshot. I said earlier today what a snapshot is. It's a photo. And I store one snapshot. And I call it start. You can call it whatever you want. The reason I do that is, once again, it's confirming that I can actually write something to the drive, and we're not just like floating here on some RAM, and the console's being held together by luck. From this point now, whenever I do significant changes, I would update this snapshot and I would update my show file. On the VI consoles, if you run into an issue and the console needs to recover the show file, it will look at obviously this data that you've saved here to get all your inputs and everything going, and what was happening with the cards in the back of the console and the stage racks. And it will look at this info here to get you to a starting point. So it's a get out of jail card. Even if you're only mixing one band and it's tiny little 3-piece and it's only 8 channels, just save a snapshot. It takes milliseconds to do. It takes milliseconds to update. Just like that, update it. Now, if you're in that scenario where I said previously you've lost all your outputs, the only thing you do is you come here and you go to your start scene and you recall it. So maybe you've lost some fader positions, but at least you've got all your naming, you've got all your input patching, you've got all your output patching, you've got whether the auxes were pre and post, and it just gets you out of trouble. So obviously you can do this with a show file. You can shut the console down and start it up again, but then everyone's going to know you made a big boo-boo. Or if it's just one monitor that's lost its patching, recalling the snapshot is a way of getting back to a good starting point without losing everything. Also, if you're mixing at a club, when I was younger, I used to do a lot of clubs, like I'm sure you guys will still do or are doing. What I will do is I don't bother really doing too much with my snapshots, because the band comes up, they play, and then they go, and we never see each other again, or till next time. And there's maybe 5 or 6 bands. But what is a very nice little trick is to, once you've sound checked like your drums and your bass and keyboards going and kind of a basic mix, create a snapshot. Then when the next band comes up, and for some reason maybe they're the same, they also have a drummer obviously, and they've got a bassist, and instead of a keyboard they've got an electric. I recall that same snapshot. Now the monitor's already sorted, and now I just need to sort out a vocal mic and electric guitar to the other auxes, and I'm basically there. So I try and always think when I'm mixing, whether it's at a church or a club or a big festival like any boss, I think what I'm doing now might be a scenario in an hour's time or in 3 days' time. Even sometimes when I mix, who did we talk? We spoke about Fun Coke. Yoko, if he plays for more than one band, I'll save his in-ear mixes, so that when I know somewhere that the chances of seeing him again on one of the other bands, or Jewels Fantasties or whatever, is pretty good. So when I see him, I'm like, I normally see you at festivals, I'm gonna save your in-ear mix. So once his in-ear mix is good, I'll save it, and then it's easy to get it back to him. Or if I get a mix and I go like, oh, this mix is actually quite similar to this other band that I mix every single year, I'll just save it as a snapshot. I'll save it as a preset. A little bit of sideline informatie there. Snapshots, there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do here. We're going to look tomorrow at some of the hidden features, global ons and offs. Just be aware of this little button here. It disables all the snapshots. It's on the screen. It's right there. I just want to mention it. It's kind of something you'll only really use in more advanced features, but just be aware of it. We can spend a lot of time here, but I see we are running tight. You'll see all the time code settings, notes, how the fades work. snapshot data that needs to go to the UA server, whether time codes on and off, global filters with regards to isolations, MIDI in and out. We're going to do tomorrow. Hopefully, if I can get that keyboard working, I'll show you how to trigger a snapshot using MIDI, or how to use the console to push out a MIDI note. Using GPIOs, setting in a blackout on the screens. All these are hidden. This is what I'm saying. This is kind of how the console was designed. If you only need to make a snapshot, it's there, but the other features are there, but they are sometimes slightly in a lower layer or tucked away in a way that's not going to get you into trouble. The one that's important for you to know at the moment is that we can make a snapshot. So we've done our labeling and we've got this band and it's there. That channel is off. And we want to make a snapshot of this. We say store. And we can give it a name. So it's a band and it's called MX. Now, at some stage, we want to be able to recall it. So there you can see the faders are down. When I go to the snapshot called MX, the fader position is up. Every single thing on the console gets recalled. Everything, except if you've used isolations. Or if you've fiddled with the recall scope, yeah. Once again, keep that tab closed. I've often had guys phone me and then they left it open and they accidentally pushed some of these things. And now the EQs are not recording anymore. It's just keeping the previous snapshots EQs. There's also all and none there, by the way, for all of these. Okay, everyone understands snapshots, everyone in the room at least. Okay, very important. Everyone understand the shofar. We'll dig in a little bit deeper there tomorrow. So shofar's right there. Once again, if I want to now save this shofar, I'll just say save. I'll read the description there, so what I'm going to save, so yes. If I want to now branch out, same as on a computer, I'll say save as, it's right there. GPIOs is general purpose ins and outs. Don't worry too much about it now. The console is using general purpose GPIOs for some of the features on the console, which is, for instance, a tap. I can demonstrate that. So if I go effects unit, number 4, and I make this effects a delay, you'll see it's coming on, it's now there. So if I tap that button, the tap delay, they will change. I've not disconnected from this, but it's right here. Sync, it's referring to clocking on the console. So the word clock at the back, you can't actually physically force it. It will always prioritize internal as its first priority. As soon as you introduce a clock in the back, it will then go to that. If you want the clock in the back, or if you're outputting the clock to a different device to follow the Dante network, you have to specify it, and it's here. So obviously on the VI 1000, 2000 and the 3000, they all come standard with Dante, and if you've ever worked with Dante, you know that you need to tell it what to do with the clock. It's handy to read this because slave means all the other devices are slaving from the console. Master means it is slaving, so it's kind of the other way around. That's why there's a little description that actually explains what that means. So in that scenario, you'll have to then click that button there, but I don't have a Dante connected at the moment. How are we doing for time? Got 5 minutes left. Tie lines, it's just connecting two things to each other. Like, I don't know, do you guys still have patch bays in your studio? Exactly that. You've got the little patch cord, right? And you say, this effects out needs to go to this channel. You've made a tie between those 2 points. You can make a tie between anything on the console. So I can say, I want to plug this mic in the back here into input number 5, and I want to tie it to that output. It'll obviously cause a huge amount of feedback, but we can do it if we want to. Say in a scenario where we've got 4 ambient mics in front of us and I need to send them to the recorder, right? So I'll bring them on the console, I'll label them, give them a name, and now I need to say where on the console are they patched. They are coming in the last 4, so we're going to start at 13 and 14 and so on and so forth. And where do they need to go to? They're going to the recording, and the recording is going out of the Midis, and it's also the last 4, like that. So whatever's coming in there is going out there. There's no processing in between. It also doesn't use any additional processing on the console, so it's not like you're adding a load. So when you're doing recordings to tape, this is a great way of doing it. Or when you're in a scenario where you're sending, say, a playback or a multi-track to your monitor engineer or to the broadcast engineer, and you don't exactly know what you will be doing with that on the console, you can patch it like this, and then he's getting it regardless of whether you've patched it or not. As soon as I push play, whatever's coming in Midi, so if I go here, local, there, says Dante, whatever's coming there is going out of 61 forever and always. There's 128 of them. 4 effects units. In the practical, we'll talk quickly about options on how to set them up. I guess the simplest way is how you do an analog console. You'll create aux, and the aux will go to the effects unit, and the outputs of the effects unit will go to a channel. Very simple. There's 2 other ways of doing it. You can either insert it onto an aux or also insert it onto a channel. And I think I'm going to try and just quickly demonstrate that, because this is definitely something that will be handy to someone that's watching this online. So I'm just going to go mix 1 to 8. I'm going to say aux 8. Once again, you see the layout looks very much similar to the inputs. It's just kind of flipped upside down. We've got EQs, effects, insert. We've got a graphic in there, dynamics. And then where do we want to send this? So we say we want to send it to a effects unit. Interesting thing that's just happened here is that it's only going left. Why? Because we haven't set to this bus that it is stereo. So how do we do that? We deselect everything on the channel. We make a stereo. We're going to say whether it's got following the pans on the channel. You can say yes, that's an aux. So now, if I patch it, it goes to left and right. Great. Obviously, we're going to give it a name. Give it a color if you like. So the first thing we see is that on the bus it actually shows you a little picture of the effects now. Now there's 2 ways of manipulating it. You can just jump there, or you can go back to the tab we were previously when you can manipulate it there. So let's say this was for vocals. I really love halls. And let's say this is going to be a nice long one. It's giving us an indication on the lexicon 1, which is the first effects unit, that there's something patched to it. and it's bus 8, and I've labeled it effects, which is perfect. Now we need to create a return for it, and let's say we're going to bring it onto layer A. Let's say 7 and 8. Whenever you're patching stereo sources back into the console, a nice trick is to first pair the two channels together, then you don't have to patch left and right. It'll patch the other side for you. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to pair this with 8. And we can obviously give it a name again. Yeah. You can obviously be a bit more specific, say it's a hall reverb or vocal reverb or whatever the case might be. And then we're going to give it an input. Same as always, we click on input. The only difference now is instead of going to local or Midi or stage box, we're going to the one right at the top, which is lexicon out, and that's it. And it will automatically patch it to the left and the right, and that's it. So now when we send something to the aux, it will hit the effects unit, get processed, and return to those channels. Just finally, before we close the webcast, if you're in a scenario where you want to add an effects unit, maybe on one of the bigger consoles, and you can't return it anywhere because you don't have channels anymore. You've spent all your channels, but you've got an effects unit available. You can do it like this. So I'm just going to unpatch it here. Right. I'm going to go back to my bus. There it is. In this section here, it actually does give me the option of sending the aux to the left and right there. So obviously this is not something we want to be doing with all the effects, but maybe something like a brass section where it's, you know, when they play, there's always effects. Vocals, maybe not the best idea, because if you do it this way and you want to mute it, it's going to be very hard. It's not going to sound very nice. But say, say it's a saxophone, and you know the guy, whenever he plays, there's effects on it. You can do that, and now you save those two return channels.
Do you use your control of level? You just send it straight to your left and right?
No, I just, so he's asking if I use the control of the bus, if I'll bring the fader level down. Is that what you're asking?
No, so if you send your reverb straight to your left and right,
Yeah.
you lose your amount of like level output. So
Coming from the effects unit. Yeah, but I mean, if you do it, you can obviously then still pull down. You can still pull down the bus like that. Or if you set it up like this from the beginning, you'll just be pushing less into the bus. So those are the two scenarios. But you can grab it and pull it down, yes. Once again, if that's a change that you're making in the show and you want it to stay the same, you'll just isolate that channel to make sure it's not jumping between snapshots. Use a stage rack, or you lose a power supply on the stage rack, or any of those things, it'll come up as an error. Yeah. It'll be logged with a time and a message to say what it is. Once again, important that your time and your date is set correctly, otherwise all this data doesn't mean anything. You can set your time and date. And then the last little thing that we're going to just look at now before we go is just where everything is located concerning a system. It's going to look a bit weird now because this computer is running the offline editor, but there's no hardware connected to it. So it won't be able to give me proper data, but this is where you'll find it. Obviously we've got a network at the left top there. One of the features that we'll demonstrate tomorrow is we can bring in the metadata from a receiver, like a wireless receiver like this. to come onto the channel, so we can actually see the battery power and the RF strength. That's under that tab there. Soundcraft partnered with UAD concerning a plug-in server. It's called a real-time rack. You can connect it to the console and then give it the Midi feed at the back and give it a data connection, and then it integrates with the console. So whenever you make a change on the UAD server, it will save that data onto the snapshot to have obviously control over your plugins between different snapshots. Mirroring is the mode that I was running previously today, where the console was connected to my computer. That's how I can manipulate the console via the computer. There's an array of different things that you can do with this. You can use it for a backup console, so you can connect two consoles to each other, or you can have a computer to a console, or you can have a second console if you need more faders. So you've got one of these consoles in stock, and you need to mix quite a big show, and you're only after more faders. You can put a network cable between the two consoles and then have additional fader bank. Depending on how you integrate it into your system will obviously depend on how the result you'll get. Most commonly, people use it when the client's asking for a backup at front of house. It'll give all the signals to the one console and all the signals to the other console. It'll go out of the outputs into a signal processor that's feeding the PA, and you'll be able to flip between two different scenes there. So if the one dies, you can just walk over to the other one and continue mixing. Tomorrow we'll show how we set it up and get it working. These tabs down here is basically giving us data about what the console is doing, and in terms of its DSP and local ins and outs and stage box. At the moment, there's no data there because the computer obviously doesn't have anything connected to it. So hopefully we can see it here. See if I bring the brightness down a bit. Oh, where is it? Here. So the one at the top is a DSP engine. It's saying OK, and it's got one mic card there, a line out card, AES, EBU, and Dante. There's one little red one because we only have one power supply connected at the moment. That's why that little red light is there as well. Stage box, it'll show you exactly the same data where it's connected, and it'll show you whether the fans are grafting and also what's happening with the power on the unit, and that's basically it. So as you can see, there's not a huge amount actually when it comes to the menus. Everything else is kind of integrated into the console. There's a little tab here that says fader calibration. It's not something we use often, but I don't know if you've ever seen a console where the faders creep. Like two channels are linked together, but it looks like that. It's not nice and even. So what happens is I'm pushing this fader, and the value that's being sent there is now not corresponding with the motor. So the motor is doing something weird, or the belt's slightly stretched, or the fader's old, or there's dust in there, or someone spilled their Coke. Then what we can do to remedy that, the other scenario is if we change the fader out. We need to give it a value. We can use this feature called fader calibrate, that guy there, and it'll just take you through a prompt to put all the faders down, all the faders up, and it will basically just calibrate to make sure that 0 is 0 on each fader. Okay. Under settings, this will be the last thing we talk about now before lunch. Once again, not a huge amount of stuff. There's a little button that says enable next and last. It's this guy here. So this is to move a snapshot back and forward. The danger with this thing is that when it's on, it goes immediately. It's not asking you any questions. So when you push it, it goes. And normally it's off because it's very easy to stand here and accidentally push it. So up to the point, I normally leave it off, and then just before the show, I'll switch it on. Metering, you can choose what you want to do with your metering. Backup interval is once you've created a show file. Another reason why you want to always create a show file is once you've created it, it will do a backup in every so many seconds. So the options is 1 minute, 30 seconds, or 15. If you're running a theater show, at some stage, you maybe want to switch this thing off, because if it's the same show and you've honed it in and it's perfect, you don't want your show file to get bigger and bigger and bigger and store all this metadata for no reason. You can switch it off. The inputs, the local ins, when it comes to Midi and Dante, I set this right in the beginning. So they standard on the console. When you buy the console, you get them for free. The outputs are parallel. So whatever I'm routing to Dante 1 is going to Midi 1. You can actually see it if you go to the output section here and you patch it. You'll see the labeling says Dante and Midi. So it doesn't matter. You can use the Dante as your backup recording and the Midi as your main recording, for instance. When it comes to the input side of those two ports, you have to say whether you're going to use the Dante or the Midi. It's either or. So I've made it Midi now, so that it says Midi. If I go to, yeah, and I go Dante, it'll say Dante. So it's either or. So obviously, okay, right. Oh, getting lost. The function key, this previously we spoke about it. This is the little F key here. So normally it's to swap the inputs. If you want to use that key to lock the strips, you have to toggle it there to strip lock. When it comes to the delay units, you need to decide if it's milliseconds, meters, or feet and inches. What's this? The EQ? Oh, the units. You can it's the bandwidth per octave or Q. Anyway, not a big deal. One other feature we're going to try and demonstrate tomorrow is if you're receiving signals into the console, and this console is acting as a, say, let's call it a front of house console, and maybe it's a church, and this console is feeding via a direct out, a broadcast console. You want to be able to obviously build a show file on the broadcast console, and when you do gain changes here, it shouldn't affect that side, because then it's going to mess up the gain structure completely. So what you can do is you can decide to do an offset on the channel. It's called DOGS, direct out gain sharing. On the channel, so when you're pulling the gain, it's pushing down the trim, or to the direct out. So when you're pulling up the gain, it's pushing the direct out down. So I guess in a scenario we're using a server, that's maybe not a bad option either. Okay, that's everything for today. So after this, we're going to do some practicals. Let me just see that I didn't skip anything over. We did the patching, effects, and gang we did. Basic talkback, ISOs, everything there. Great, and we'll have a look at that just now. You guys have any questions in the room before we hang up on Facebook? And maybe, Ian, if there's any questions on Facebook, we can take a look at them now. We're slightly over already, so I want to... No questions. You guys have any? Oh, you've answered them. Fantastic. Ian, you're a star. Is any questions in the room at this stage? Great. Okay. Awesome, guys. Then for everyone on Facebook who've been watching or going to watch later, thank you for watching. And yeah, if you're available tomorrow, we'll be doing advanced features, so looking at some of the not so obvious features, and try and demo as many of them as possible. That'll also be tomorrow at 10 o'clock, but I'll leave the recording up if you can't make it to come and watch it at a later stage. Cool, guys. Thanks for watching.